The sand under my boots was cold, and I was already bleeding when I told them I would keep going. I was 15. It was the final of the whole academy, every year watching from the stands, and across from me stood the fourth prince with a wooden blade he did not need. My left arm hung wrong from an earlier round. Anyone with sense would have raised a hand and ended it. I did not raise my hand. I set my right foot back, brought my sword up, and I told the referee I was not done. The prince looked at me the way you look at a lock that will not open, not angry, just deciding how much force it would take. Then he moved. I have gone back over that exchange more times than I would admit to anyone. I know I stepped in. I know I meant to bind his blade and turn it. What I remember is the shape of his strike changing at the last breath, coming down not on the sword, but across the hand that held it. And I remember the sound. That is the part that stays, not the pain, the sound. A short, wet, final sort of crack that I felt in my teeth. And after it, my right hand simply stopped being mine. The fingers would not close. The sword dropped into the sand, and I stood there looking at a hand I had trained with every day of my life, and it looked back at me like a stranger's. They carried me out. The prince had already turned to bow to the stands. The crowd was cheering him, and somewhere in it my father was watching, and I understood, lying on that cold sand with my hand ruined for good, that whatever I had been that morning, I would not be it again. The healers did what they could, which was to keep the hand attached. They wrapped it and splinted it and told me to be patient. I was patient for a long time. I did the exercises. I squeezed the little leather ball they gave me until my whole arm shook, morning and night, in the dark of a room where nobody could see me trying. The grip never came back. Some mornings I would wake and forget and reach for a cup with that hand out of old habit and watch it fumble the thing to the floor and remember all over again. A swordsman with no grip in his sword hand is a story that ends there. Everyone around me seemed to understand that faster than I did. My father stopped speaking to me directly. The instructor stopped correcting my form, which is the cruelest thing a teacher can do because it means they have decided you are not worth the breath. I became a body that took up a seat. That was 3 years ago. Everyone agreed it made me nothing. Nobody asked what I could do with the other hand. Nobody watched where I went when the sun went down. 3 years later, I was standing in Instructor Crane's office, and he was telling me I was expelled. He took his time with the word. He was the kind of teacher the students called the devil instructor, a man who ran his drills like punishments and enjoyed the part where you flinched. He read out the charges like a sentence he had rehearsed. My grades were the worst in my year. I had missed a full week of classes. I had, in his generous summary, no drive, no effort, and no will to improve. He said the academy could not afford to carry a body that would not march. I stood and let him finish. He wanted a reaction, and I have never been good at giving people the reaction they want. He got to my family, because they always get to the family. He reminded me that House Ashford was one of the great nightlines of the kingdom, that my 2 older brothers had graduated top of their class and were serving knights, and that a boy born into all of that had somehow chosen to become a stain on it. He seemed to think this would land somewhere soft. A lazy dropout with no drive, I said. Is that the whole of it? That set him off. He snapped something about how I had no right to compare myself to real knights, that even the local orders out in the provinces would not take a boy like me. He was almost shouting by the end of it, spit on his lip, savoring the last chance he would ever have to look down at me. I let him have it. Then, when he ran out of breath, I said the truth, which was that plenty of capable knights served their whole lives in those local orders. He sneered at and never once set foot in his precious academy. His face went a color I found genuinely interesting. The thing is, he was not wrong about the drive. I told him that too. I never had the will to become a knight. I had spent years pretending, because pretending was easier than the conversation with my father, and I was tired of both. He puffed himself up for the finish. He forbade me, in a grand voice, from ever telling anyone I had studied here, as if I would want the credit. I bowed my head, just a little, the way a good student does. Thank you, I told him, for everything you've done for me. I meant it as plainly as I could, and that was what got him. Anger he could have used. Gratitude he had no answer for. He stood there working his jaw while I turned and walked out of his office for the last time, and I swear the corridor felt lighter with every step. On the way through the yard, I passed a knot of students who had been my classmates. They did not lower their voices. One of them said the dropout had finally been thrown out, and another laughed, and I kept walking, because none of them mattered, and because I had somewhere to be that none of them knew about. I went home to tell my father myself. I owed him that much, or I told myself I did. He received me standing, which was how I knew it was already over. Gerald Ashford had been a knight before he was a father, and he had never quite worked out how to be the second thing. He already knew. Word travels fast when a great house has something to be ashamed of. He did not ask what happened. He informed me what I was. I will not put his words in your ear the way he put them in mine. The shape of it was this. I was a worthless thing. I had heaped shame on a name that men had died to make honorable, and every day I breathed under his roof, I made his other sons smaller by comparison. He listed them while he did it, the way he always did. Victor the eldest, already spoken of as the youngest knight commander the kingdom had seen. Marcus the second, top of his class, a real knight. And then me. He said the word disgrace like it cost him nothing. Then he took the name back. He did it formally, which somehow made it worse and better at once. He declared that I was no longer his son and no longer an Ashford, that the house renounced me, and he waited for me to break. My mother was crying. Eleanor had always loved me in the quiet, useless way of someone who had learned long ago that her voice changed nothing in that hall, and she stood at the edge of it now with her hands pressed to her mouth, weeping without a sound. My youngest brother Damien stood near our father with a smirk he did not bother to hide. He was on the night track himself, and he had waited a long time to watch this. And my little sister Lily ran across the floor and grabbed my sleeve. She was small enough that she had to reach up to do it. She was crying so hard she could barely get the words out, asking me not to go, asking why, holding on to the fabric of my coat like she could keep me in the house with her weight. That was the only part of the whole day that got anywhere near me. I crouched down so we were level, and I told her I was going to be all right, that this was not a sad thing, even though it looked like one, and I let her hold on until she believed me a little. Then I stood up and faced my father, and I gave him the one thing he was not braced for. I understand, I said. I returned the Ashford name. He waited for the rest, for the plea or the fury. I smiled instead. Today is my new birthday. For one moment, the great head of House Ashford had nothing. He had built himself for a son who would beg or rage or weep, and I had handed him a stranger who thanked him for the door. He could not shout at that. Shouting only works on someone who is still trying to get back in. I kissed the top of Lily's head. I looked at my mother long enough that she would know it was not her fault, because it never had been. I did not look at Damien at all. Then I walked out of the house I had been born in, and the door closed behind me, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Light. Not happy, exactly. Just light. The way you feel when you put down a pack you had stopped noticing you were carrying. The name was gone. I was just Ethan now, no house behind it. I found I did not miss it at all. I did not walk toward the inn, or toward pity, or toward anyone who knew my father. I walked toward the Adventurers Guild. Here is the thing none of them knew. While House Ashford had been quietly ashamed of me, I had been quietly living another life. I had registered with the guild more than a year back, under just my given name, and I had been taking quests and getting paid for them the whole time. The bed the guild kept for me at a plain inn was more of a home than the Great Hall had ever been. The family thought I was a boy who could not hold a sword. The guild ledger thought I was someone worth sending after the jobs the careful ones would not touch. Nobody had connected the two, and I had liked it that way. So the disownment did not frighten me the way my father meant it to. He thought he was cutting me loose to drown. He was cutting me loose to swim. There was one more thing, and this was the thing I had been carrying for months without telling a living soul. Some time back, in a tavern out past the market district, a wandering bard had taught me a magic. I still could not tell you why he chose me. He had strange, patient eyes, and he asked me nothing about my family, and he showed me something he called bond summoning, and then he was gone before morning, like he had never been there. Every day since, the thing he taught me sat at the back of my skull and hummed, low and steady, like it was waiting for me to have nothing left to lose. The evening had gone that deep blue that comes before real dark. The street was empty, and walking there, free of the name and the school, and every hand that had ever tried to hold me in place, I finally did the thing I had been afraid to do while I still had something they could take. I lifted my right hand, the ruined one, the hand that had not closed properly in 3 years. I did not need it to close. I only needed it to be open. I reached not for anything in the street, but for that hum at the back of my head, and I followed it out past the edge of the world I could see. It was like putting my palm through a cold doorway into somewhere else, somewhere the air was a different air. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and I stood in a darkening street with my broken hand held out like a fool. Then the air over my palm went cold, truly cold. A hard bite of it against my skin in the warm summer dusk, the way a cellar door breathes when you open it in July. The hum in my skull swelled and pitched high, and for one instant, I felt the shape of that other place on the far side of my hand, wide and dark and full of things. And the magic reached in and took hold of one of them and dragged it back through to me. Something folded into being out of nothing at all, taking on weight as it came, and the weight pressed down into my open palm, and my ruined fingers curled around it on their own before my mind had caught up. I looked down. It was a bottle, a clean, clear bottle, ridged along its sides, sealed at the top with a little ringed cap, and inside it, plain water beaded with cold. It was not glass. It gave a little when I squeezed, some smooth material I had no name for, light as nothing and perfectly made, and no craftsman in the kingdom turned out a shape so even. The cold of it seeped through my fingers and up into a hand that had not felt much of anything in 3 years. It had come from somewhere that was not here at all, pulled across the dark between worlds by a magic a stranger had left in me, and it sat in the palm of the hand a prince had broken. I stood in that empty street and I turned it in the last of the light and I laughed, once, quietly, because there was no one to hear it. 3 years they had all agreed I was nothing. My father had just given the name back and gone to bed sure of it. The prince did not even remember my face. And here I was, thrown away and disowned and crippled, holding a thing out of another world in a hand that was not supposed to work. I cracked the seal and drank. The water was sweet and it was cold, and it was mine. Whatever came next, I was not going to crawl back to any of them. Let the ones who threw me away find out for themselves what I was worth. They could come to me. The guild took me the way it always did. No questions, no name required. That was the thing I liked most about the place. Walking in that evening with nothing left to lose, and nobody owed an explanation. Walter was behind the counter, polishing a mug that did not need polishing. I leaned in and gave him the short version of my week. Disowned, expelled, nameless by dark. He laughed, not a chuckle, a full, wheezing, slap-the-counter laugh that turned heads 3 tables over. "Don't look at me like that," he said, dragging a thumb under one eye. "I laughed so you wouldn't have to. It's textbook, kid. Noble boy plays adventurer. Family throws a fit. Boy gets tossed out on his ear. I've watched it happen more times than I can count. 10 years behind that counter, and a retired adventurer's shoulders under the apron. If anyone had earned the right to laugh at me, it was Walter. I let him. Then he set the mug down and slid a folded slip of parchment across the wood, and his voice dropped out of the joke. A B-rank party had put in a recruitment request for me, by name. I did not touch the slip. They saw your last job. He watched my face while he spoke, the way you watch to see if someone already knows what you're about to tell them. Word gets around. A dropout nobody wanted, and now a full party wants him at their back. He tapped the parchment once. You seriously went and killed a wyvern on your own? It was a small one. That was true. It had also been a wyvern, and I had been alone, and I had walked out of that canyon with its reward still warm in my pocket. Walter knew exactly how small a small wyvern was. He let out a low whistle and shook his head, and for a second, the joke was gone from him entirely. I pushed the slip back across the counter. I told him no. He blinked. People did not turn down a B-rank party. That was the door out of scraping. Steady coin, strong shields, a name that meant something in a guild hall. I had just been thrown out of one family. He could not understand why I would walk straight into another. But that was the whole point. A party is a kind of belonging, and belonging is a kind of being owned. And I was done being owned by anyone. I had something of my own now. It was the first thing in my life I had chosen instead of inherited. There's a magic, I told him. Mine. Nobody else has it. I'm going to learn it all the way down, and I'm going to do it alone. Walter looked at me for a long moment. Then he called me surprisingly serious for a boy everyone had written off, and he asked what it was called. Bond summoning, I said. He had never heard of it. Neither had anyone. To understand why I would give up a B-rank party for a magic no one had heard of, you have to go back a few weeks, to the tavern. I had tried everything by then. Warrior, archer, thief, tamer, healer. I had put my hand to all of it and come out the same each time. Good. Never great. A middling grade in every class the guild offered, and a father back home who had struck me once for placing second and never let me forget it. My second brother was 3 times the fighter I was. My eldest brother, 10 times. Next to them, I was a rounding error with a sword. So when the bard sat down across from me, I was not expecting anything. He had a harp and a traveler's cloak, and that unhurried way of looking at a person like he already knew the ending. He told me I had a rare kind of talent, that I could learn anything and master nothing, and that this Exactly this was why I was the only one alive who could carry a lost ancient art. He called it bond summoning. He offered to teach me, for free. I learned the basics faster than I had ever learned anything, and then, the moment I had the shape of it, he was simply gone. Harp, cloak, patient eyes, all of it. Out the door and never seen again. I should have wondered harder about that. A stranger hands a nobody a lost magic, asks nothing, and vanishes the week it takes root. Kindness that costs the giver nothing has a smell to it, and this one sat under everything like a splinter I could not find. But I was expelled 2 days later, and a boy with nothing to his name does not turn down the one gift the world has ever handed him. I took it. I told myself I would think about the price later. Back at the counter, Walter was still turning the whole thing over, so I gave him the rest of it. I was going into the Great Wood, field work. He stopped moving. "Say that again," he said, very quietly. I said it again. The Great Wood, to test the magic on real monsters, for as long as it took. The Great Wood is the forest east of everything, larger than my whole country, the place the maps stop pretending to cover. Adventurers go in, and the smart ones come back changed, and the rest do not come back at all. Even a slime in there is a killer. Walter had spent his whole career telling green recruits to stay out of it, and here I was, telling him it was my training ground. He tried money first, the way worried people do. He offered me a loan, told me the Great Wood ate coin faster than it ate men, that I would starve before a monster ever got the chance. I told him I still had the wyvern reward. I was fine. He tried fear next, quieter, and I gave him the only warning that mattered, because I meant it and because he deserved it straight. If I drop off the roster for a while, I told him, don't put me down as dead. I'll come back when I come back. He did not laugh at that one. He gripped the edge of the counter, a big gruff man gone suddenly older, and he looked at me the way I think my mother would have if she had understood what I was walking into. He believed in me. That was the trouble. He believed in me enough to be afraid. I clasped his forearm once, the way adventurers do. Then I turned and walked out toward the eastern road, and the door swung shut on the warmest place I had left. Several days of travel got me to the fortress city on the forest's edge, and one more step got me somewhere the world stops being the world. The Great Wood did not feel like woods. It felt like a room with something in it. The air pressed on the back of my neck, cold and wet and watchful, and every branch held its breath. I had that itch between the shoulders that means you are being measured. Standing there letting the dark stare at me was worse than anything it could do. So I did the stupid brave thing. I called out. If something was there, it could come out and say so. Something did. It came out of the shadow low and fast, a slime, semi-clear and round, the size of a curled dog, and nothing at all like the harmless jelly they let children poke in the tame fields back home. This one moved like a thrown stone. It hit before I finished reading it, and the impact rang all the way up my good arm. We fought. I will not pretend it was easy. The thing was quick, and it was strong, and it kept coming from angles a slime had no business finding, and more than once, I gave ground, with my heart going hard in my throat. But I had killed a wyvern in a canyon by myself, and I had spent 3 years learning to fight with the wrong hand, and a boy who is good at everything is very hard to surprise twice. I found its rhythm. I broke it. And then, this is the part that mattered, I did not finish it. The killing blow was right there, easy, mine to take. I held it back on purpose. I set my heel and I pulled the strike, and I let the slime live, shuddering and beaten at my feet, because slaughter was not the point. The bard had been clear on this one thing. Bond summoning does not take a servant, it takes a partner, and you cannot partner with a corpse. I knelt, put my ruined right hand flat above the trembling creature, and spoke the contract. I bind this bond. Let the covenant be sealed. No master over the other. You are mine, and I am yours, and neither stands above. The words felt older than my mouth. The gloom seemed to lean in and listen. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the slime stopped shaking. It gathered itself, whole again, every wound gone, and it launched straight at my chest and knocked me flat on my back in the mulch, quivering all over, patting at my face with a wet enthusiasm that could only be described one way. I lay there in the dirt of the deadliest forest in the world, with the slime slapping happily against my jaw, and I started to laugh. Was that, I managed, a hug? It slapped me again, delighted, with a sound like a wet palm on a window pane. So I named it for the sound, Slappy, my first bond, and the first living thing since Lily that had ever chosen to come toward me instead of away. I sat up, wiped slime off my chin, and got to the real experiment. Getting a monster to like you is only the doorway. What waits on the other side is the whole reason the bard sought me out. Bond summoning does not call spirits or beasts or demons the way ordinary summoning does. It reaches across the bond, into a world that is not this one, a lost place none of these trees have ever touched. and it pulls a thing bodily through into my hand. That was what the bard had explained between his songs, and until this moment, I had only half believed it. I held my open palm to the empty air, felt for the thread that now ran between me and the small warm weight at my knee, and I called it. Cold light unfolded in front of me. Not a stat sheet, not a list of numbers, a single pane hanging in the dark, and on it, offered up like the whole world had shrunk to one choice. There was exactly one thing I was allowed to summon. I reached for it. The air in my hand went cold. Then it went solid. A bottle settled into my palm out of nothing at all. Clear, sweating, beaded with frost, so cold it stung the stiff fingers of my right hand into feeling something for the first time in years. Inside it, water. Not river water, not flask warm and stale. Clean, colder than the forest. I cracked the seal with a small crisp snap that had no business existing in a world with no such bottles in it, and I drank. Sweet, freezing, perfect. This was the junk. This was the useless party trick they had all laughed at. The pointless magic that had helped get me thrown out of everything. A magic whose grand and terrible power, on its very first day, was a bottle of cold water. And I sat there in the killing dark and grinned like a fool, because I understood exactly what I was holding. Every adventurer who has ever died in a place like this died looking for water as much as fighting for their life. You ration it, you dig for it, you drink from things that make you sick. And I had just pulled clean cold water out of a world that does not exist, and I could do it again and again, as long as I had a friend at my side. In the deadliest forest ever mapped, I would never go thirsty. Slappy pressed against my leg, wanting some. I tipped the bottle and let a thin stream run over him, and he drank it straight through his skin, glowing a little brighter, wobbling with joy. Then the bottle in my hand thinned to nothing and was gone, used up, back to wherever it came from. That was fine. There was always another. After that, I stopped testing and started working. We went deeper, Slappy and I, and we hunted. The forest was full of things that wanted us dead, which was exactly what I had come for. Every monster in the Great Wood is stronger than its kind anywhere else, which means every monster is worth more, and I needed to grow. So I picked fights I would have run from a week ago, and I won them, because I was no longer fighting alone. That was the part I had not expected. Slappy was not a pet riding along on my luck. He fought. He read the field faster than I could, slid into the gaps at my blind side, took the strike meant for my spine, and shrugged it off like rain. Whatever came at my back, he was already there. I had spent my whole life being told I needed someone stronger to protect me. Turned out, I just needed someone who chose to. By the deep of the night, I had cut through more monsters than I could count, and I thought I had earned a second friend. There was a beast I had spared, waiting for the contract. I reached for the words, and the cold light opened again, and this time it told me no. One bond. That was the ceiling. At the rank I was, the very bottom of this magic, I was allowed exactly one partner and no more. The door I had just walked through only opened once, until I was strong enough to widen it. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I laughed under my breath, because the answer was so simple it was almost rude. If low rank meant one bond, then I would stop being low rank. Every creature in this forest was a rung on that ladder. All I had to do was climb. I looked down at Slappy. He looked up at me, or did whatever a slime does that means the same thing, and I swear he already understood the plan. All right, I told him. Let's go leveling. We turned together and went further in, toward the dark and the teeth, and the long, slow work of becoming something the world would eventually have to look at. Back home, they had thrown me away as nothing. Out here, in the place that kills men, I had a magic that pulled water from another world, a friend who guarded my blind side, and a ladder with no top I could see. I had never been less nothing in my life. I killed the morning's first monster before the mist had finished burning off. A horned thing came at me low out of a fern bank, and it did not get back up, and Slappy flowed over the leaf litter to slap the wet ground where it had died like he was taking attendance. That was the whole shape of my days now. Wake in the dark, fight until my working arm ached and the light came up green through the leaves, pull cold water out of nothing when my throat went dry, share it with the slime, keep going until something bigger than the last thing came out of the trees. I was not thinking about home. I had trained myself not to, the way you train yourself off a bad tooth. Home had thrown me out and shut the door, and I had walked into the one forest in the kingdom that killed grown men for sport, because at least the forest was honest about wanting me dead. Out here, nobody smiled at me while they did it. So I want to be clear about something before I tell this part. I was not there for any of it. I did not plan it, did not push it, did not so much as write a letter. While I was 3 days ride deep in the Great Wood, teaching a slime to guard my blind side, 2 of the men who had decided I was nothing were about to have the worst week of their lives. I would not hear a word of it for a long time. When I finally did, I made the people telling it slow down. This is how it went. That morning, Instructor Crane walked the academy halls like a man who had finally scrubbed a stain off a wall he owned. I know how he felt about it because he could not stop saying it. For years, he had run the top class at the academy, and to Crane, a class was a trophy shelf. Every student a polished piece, arranged just so, and one dull spot ruining the whole display. I had been the dull spot, the slow one, the cripple who could not close his sword hand. He had expelled me, and he had enjoyed it. And now, walking those halls, he told himself the display was finally flawless. Nothing left but talent. Nothing left to be embarrassed by. That morning, he stopped to tell 2 other instructors about it in the corridor, loud enough for their students to hear. How a firm hand was the only real teaching. How he had finally pruned the dead branch, and his class would bloom now. How the rest of them ought to have his nerve. He straightened a portrait as he passed it. He was, by every account I ever heard, having the best morning of his life. And that is the picture I want you to keep for a moment, because the higher a man climbs on his own good opinion, the more there is to hear when he lands. He came into the golden class to announce it. The golden class was the pride of the whole kingdom that year, the top 6th years, the ones every night order was already fighting over. Crane stood in front of them and told them the dead weight had been cut loose, and he waited for the room to be grateful. Nobody clapped, nobody moved, and from the back of that perfect room, the 4th prince stood up. Prince Roland was the top student of the golden class, and he had a way of making a room go cold just by being unhappy in it. He asked Crane, very quietly, whether the man had the faintest idea what he had just thrown away. Crane laughed it off at first. He started to explain. The boy was talentless, a disgrace. Everyone knew it. The prince let him dig for a while. Then he took the shovel. He told Crane the truth in a flat, unhurried voice, and every sentence landed like a stone going into a well. That I had been ranked 2nd in the entire academy from my first year through my 3rd. 2nd out of all of them. That something had happened in my 4th year, and I had stopped trying, dropped to the bottom on purpose, and let men like Crane write me off. And that even sunk at the bottom of his rankings. Even with a hand that would not grip a blade, I had quietly gone out and cleared adventurer contracts as a student, B-rank contracts, that I had killed a wyvern alone, a monster that full-grown knights train for years to face in numbers, and still bury their friends after. The whole golden class heard every word of it. These were the students who had sat a few rows from me for years, watched me fail to close my ruined hand around a practice sword, and quietly filed me under the same word Crane used. Now they were learning, in one flat recitation from a prince who did not raise his voice once, that the cripple they had pitied had been beating all of them on paper until the day he chose to stop, and had been out in the dark killing the thing they wrote songs about while they slept in soft beds behind stone walls. The way it came back to me later, half of that famous class looked sick, and the other half looked like they were quietly redoing a sum and hating the answer. And through all of it, Crane kept trying to breathe. You could see the smugness go out of him a piece at a time, the way heat leaves a room when a door is left open. 2nd in the academy, his face when the prince said 2nd. The B-rank contracts, the wyvern. Each fact took another inch of him, and he had nowhere to put any of it, because everyone was a nail in the story he had told himself that morning about his perfect class and his clean shelf. Crane's face was already gray when the prince delivered the last of it. Roland told him that he had gone to the king, that the crown had already agreed to let him take me, personally, as his own knight the day I graduated, that I had been spoken for at the very top, and that a spiteful little instructor had looked at the most valuable piece in the room and thrown it in the gutter to feel tall for an afternoon. He had obstructed the will of the crown itself, the prince told him, and there would be a price for it. And then he named what Crane was now, not an instructor, not the keeper of a perfect class, a border guard, effective next month, posted to the cold edge of the kingdom where nobody would ever have to look at him again. Crane came apart in front of the whole class. This was the man who had made a small daily religion out of humiliating slower students, who had expelled me and gone home pleased with himself. And now he was on his knees on his own polished floor in front of the kingdom's best, insisting to a prince's back that he was not incompetent, that there had been some mistake, that he had only done what any sensible instructor would. It was the finest word I know for it, pathetic. He had spent his whole career sorting people into worth and worthlessness, and the crown had just done the same sort to him, out loud, and put him in the pile he despised. The prince was already turning away. He was not interested in Crane's begging any more than he had been interested in Crane's pride. He walked out telling his own people to widen the search, to find the boy named Ethan, and bring him somewhere he could be kept. His spies had been quietly looking for me for weeks already. Now they had orders to try much harder. That is the detail I want you to hold on to because it matters later. From that day, a prince of the realm had turned his whole apparatus toward finding me, and I was busy in a forest not knowing any of it existed. Here is the part I still turn over. The prince describing me like a misplaced sword, gutting a man's whole life over losing track of me. That was the same prince who, 3 years earlier, in front of the entire school, had taken the use of my sword hand and then bowed to the crowd. The hand that made me nothing was the reason the fourth prince now wanted me so badly he would burn a teacher down to get me back. I did not know whether to laugh when I heard it. I am honest, I still do not. But I filed it away, the way you file a debt you are not ready to collect. That reckoning was not coming due today. Today just belonged to Crane, and Crane had earned every cold inch of it. The same could not be said yet for my father. His week was about to get worse too, and it started at his own dinner table. My brother Marcus told me this one himself, a long time later, and even then, his knuckles went white around the cup while he did. Marcus was the second son, recently knighted, moved out to the bachelor dorms, home so rarely that being summoned to a family dinner meant something was happening. He arrived late to a hall lit up for a celebration. Our father, Gerald, was at the head of the table in full pompous glory, a former knight who had spent his whole life demanding first place from his sons and calling it love. Gerald announced the good news to the room like a toast. The useless one had been formally disowned, a mistake in the bloodline corrected. He praised the sons he had left, the genius and the knight, and the smug boy at the military school, and he told them all how blessed the great house Ashford was, and he raised his cup. Around that cup, the family arranged itself the way it always had. Our mother, Eleanor, wept without a sound, her hands pressed to her mouth, saying nothing because she had learned long ago that saying something cost more than she had. Damien, the youngest brother, wore the little sneer he practiced in mirrors. Victor, the eldest, youngest man ever to command one of the 12 night orders, ate in cold silence and did not look up, as if the whole thing were a draft from a window. And our little sister, Lily, sat small in her chair with her eyes going around the table, looking for the one brother who used to sit with her and not finding him. Marcus stood in the doorway and something in him that had been holding for 18 years quietly let go. He told me he thought about all of it in about 2 seconds. Me getting struck across the face for placing second when second was better than the whole rest of the city could manage. Me being called slow, called a disgrace, at a dinner laid out exactly like this one. Me on the floor with Lily, teaching her a card game with the hand that still worked, the only warm thing in a cold house. And this proud man at the head of the table, calling that boy a mistake and lifting his cup for it. But the thing that actually broke him, he said, was not the memories of me, it was the memory of himself. He had been in every one of those rooms. He had been the golden second son standing a polite step to the side while our father hit me and belittled me and ground me down. And he had told himself every single time that it was not his place, that speaking up would only make it worse, that I would be fine. He had let it happen for 18 years to keep his own seat warm. And now the seat was warm and the brother was gone, disowned and vanished. Maybe dead in a ditch for all this table knew. And Marcus was sitting there being toasted as one of the good sons. The guilt of that came up his throat like something he had swallowed years ago and never digested. Marcus did not shout first. He crossed the room, took the edge of the long table in both hands, and flipped it. Plates, candles, the whole celebration, over, across the floor, done. Then he shouted. He called our father a fat pig to his face, in front of the mother and the sister and the smirking boy. And for once, nobody at that table dared correct him. And then he said the thing he had been carrying like a knife. You spent our whole lives screaming at us to be first, Marcus said, leaning both fists on the wreckage where the table had been. And I finally asked around about you. You never once cracked the top 40. 40. You broke Ethan for a number you couldn't have hit on your best day. He straightened up. You threw him away tonight and called yourself blessed. Fine, then lose me too. The room went dead silent. Marcus said you could hear the candles hissing where they had rolled into the spilled wine. Our mother had stopped weeping and was just staring at her second son with her hands still at her mouth. And Lily had gone very still and very bright-eyed. And even Damien's practiced little sneer had slipped off his face because the smug boy had just watched a knighted brother flip a table and call their father a fat pig and live. Gerald sputtered. He was a man who had never never once in his life been spoken to like that at his own table, and he had no answer that was not just louder noise. And the noise did not matter anymore, because Marcus was already turning his back on all of it. Victor, the genius, the captain, the son who had everything the old man wanted, set down his fork at last. He said, in that flat, efficient way of his, that he did not care to be bothered with trivial matters outside his missions, and that Marcus could do as he liked. Then he rose and left the room, unmoved, as if the whole thing were weather happening to other people. Marcus said that was somehow colder than anything the father shouted, that Victor did not defend Gerald and did not defend Ethan, because Victor had simply decided years ago that none of them, father or brothers, were worth the cost of caring. It would be a while before anyone understood that the eldest son leaving quietly was worse for that house than the second son leaving loud. He stopped only once at the door. Lily had come out of her chair and across the wrecked room, and she caught the sleeve of his coat the way she used to catch mine, and she asked him in a small voice where Ethan had gone. Marcus told me that was the moment the anger left him and something steadier took its place. He crouched down, put his hand over hers, and told his little sister he did not know yet, but that he was going to go and find out, and that she should stop being afraid, because from tonight she had one brother in this world who would not sit quiet while another one was thrown away. Then he walked out of House Ashford and did not go back to the dorms. He told me he stood in the cold street afterward with his heart going like a drum and made himself a promise, the first one that had ever been entirely his own, not his father's, not the family's, that he would find the little brother they had thrown in a ditch, and that when the world came for Ethan, whatever it sent, it would have to come through him first. He put in for a border posting the very next morning, the kind of assignment that let a night travel and ask questions, in places a nobleman's son had no reason to go. He started looking for me before I even knew a second man had thrown me away that week. He had no idea where to start. He started anyway. That same night, I was 100 worlds away from any of it, banking a small fire in the dark and picking monster from under my nails. I did not know the prince had said my name in a cold room. I did not know a teacher had come apart. I did not know a brother had turned a table over and walked into the night swearing he would find me. All I knew was that I had leveled twice that day, that my bad hand was learning to be a good enough anchor for the magic, and that the ladder in front of me still had no top I could see. I put out the fire, and Slappy settled warm against my ruined right hand, and I slept. But this is the day it started, so I will say it plainly, the way I understand it now. That dinner was the first crack in House Ashford. Not because I cursed them, not because I swore some grand revenge in the arena and made it happen. I had done exactly one thing to my father's perfect house. I had left it. And it turned out I had been the thing they were all standing on. The moment I stopped holding it up, it began, very quietly, to come down. That was the part the world was going to take a long time to understand. I did not have to reach back for any of them. I did not have to crawl home, kneel in that great hall, and beg to be measured one more time. I had promised myself the day they took the family name back that I would never again let one of them decide my worth with a number. And here was the strange gift of the forest. Out here, worth was not a rank on a wall. It was whether you were still breathing at dawn. I was. Every dawn I was. So I just kept walking into the dark and getting stronger. And one by one, on their own legs, the people who had decided what I was worth were going to have to come out here and find out how wrong they had been. 3 days ride away, a brother was already packing a bag to do exactly that. He was the first. He would not be the last. The slime was spinning on top of my head, flinging a fan of cold water in every direction and squelching like it had invented joy when the goblins decided I looked like an easy meal. 10 of them slid out of the underbrush and made a ring around me, squat, green, grinning, rusty little cleavers in their fists. A lone human, one arm hanging a little wrong, no armor to speak of. To them, the math was simple. I let it be simple. I had spent the last stretch of days doing nothing but climb, and somewhere in there the skill had turned over to level 6, and level 6 had handed me something new. Not water this time, something slicker. Slappy plan, I said, though he didn't have the name yet. I held my ruined right hand open at my side, felt the cold gather in the dead palm the way it always did now, and the slime knew the shape of the thing before I finished thinking it. He spun. What came off him wasn't water. It was a heavy, oily grease, an industrial slick from a world that had nothing to do with this one, and it went out in a wide gleaming sheet and painted the whole ring of them at the shins. The first goblin lunged and its feet went out from under it like it had stepped onto a frozen lake. The second grabbed the first. The third grabbed the second. 10 monsters, and in the space of a breath, half of them were on their backs in the muck, cleavers spinning off into the ferns where they couldn't reach. I picked up the sharpened length of wood I'd been calling a spear and went to work from a polite distance. No heroics, no swordplay I couldn't do left-handed. Just reach and pick and step back before the next one found its feet. 5 of them stopped moving. The survivors changed their tune fast. They dropped the cleavers they still had and pressed their green hands together and made a high whining sound that on any face would have read as please. I looked at them over the point of the spear. No, I said. I'd read the guild's posting on this. A goblin you find, you finish. Not because it's satisfying, it isn't, but because the one you spare comes back in the spring with 30 friends and a grudge and a burned down village behind it. Mercy to a goblin is a debt you make somebody else pay. I raised the spear. That was the moment the 11th one dropped out of the tree. It came straight down at the back of my neck, silent. A cleaver turned point first, and I never saw it. What I heard was Slappy screaming, a shredded, panicked burst off my blind side. Nothing like his happy noise, and I threw myself sideways on instinct alone. The cleaver went into the dirt where my spine had been. I came up already swinging. The clever ones broke and ran, all of them, crashing off into the green with their arms over their heads, every last coward of them gone in 3 heartbeats. All but one. One goblin stayed. It was the one that had dropped from the tree, the ambusher, and it stood alone now in the middle of the churned mud with a broken cleaver and a leg that clearly didn't want to hold it. Its whole pack had left it. It could have run with them. It was closest to the tree line. It didn't. It planted that bad leg, bared a mouthful of crooked teeth, and glared at me like I was the one who ought to be afraid. I'd watched the others put their hands together and beg. This one had covered the retreat. It had thrown itself at my back so the cowards it called family could get clear. And now that they were gone and it was going to die for it, it wasn't begging. It was furious that I hadn't finished yet. I lowered the spear a little. The comrades you saved, I told it, are a pretty heartless bunch. You know that? It spat something at me. I didn't need the words. The meaning was clear enough. Hurry up, or are you scared? And there was so much pride packed into that ugly little body that it almost made me laugh. Here is the thing, nobody at that academy ever bothered to learn about me. I don't reward talent. Talent walks out the door the second the door gets hard. I reward the one who stays. And this half-crippled monster, spitting at a man twice its size with a broken knife, was the only creature in that clearing who had stayed. So I did the thing goblins are not supposed to earn. I reached out with the cold in my dead hand and offered it a contract. You can't force this. I'd learned that much. The bond only takes if the thing on the other end says yes. I fully expected a no. What I got from a creature that had every reason to hate me was a long, hard stare, and then a grudging, furious, unmistakable yes. The way a proud man shakes the hand of the person who beat him, because at least the person who beat him is worth the handshake. The bond snapped shut, warm, real, a second thread beside the first, and the goblin opened its mouth and said, in perfectly clear human speech, that it supposed I wasn't completely useless after all. You really said something like that, I told it. It could talk. The contract had reached in and switched on a whole language, and now the little monster wouldn't stop using it. It informed me at length that its race was proud and ancient and much misunderstood, that it personally was the strongest of its litter, and that as my newest and therefore most important retainer, it expected to be consulted on all major decisions. Slappy squelched something skeptical from my shoulder. Then the bond did what the first one had done. It offered me a new summon. The goblin's own, keyed to the goblin the way the water and the grease were keyed to the slime. It was a knife, not a wooden one, a real one, a combat blade with a silver edge so clean I could see my own tired face in it, and the instant it appeared in the air, the goblin's eyes went enormous. "What is that?" it breathed and lunged. It caught the knife out of the air, turned it over, held it up to the light, and made a sound I can only describe as religious. It tested the edge on a leaf, on a twig, on the air, spinning it, hugging it, whispering to it. It informed me, without looking up, that it loved me, that this was the finest object in all creation, and that it intended to sleep holding it. I dismissed the knife before it could sleep holding it. The howl of betrayal was tremendous. I promised, I actually had to promise, out loud, to a goblin, that it could have the blade back the next time something needed killing, and only then. It sulked, but it filed it away as a thing to look forward to, which turned out to make it a better fighting partner than any amount of discipline would have. From then on, the pattern set itself. Slappy laid the grease, I held the middle, and the goblin came screaming out of the underbrush with a knife it had waited all day to hold. We were, God help me, good at this. We'd been climbing north for a while when the goblin cleared its throat with the air of an advisor about to earn its keep. There was a hill ahead, it told me, just a small one, and on that hill lived a monster so strong that if the great and generous master were to defeat it and add it to the collection, the master's power would grow beyond measure. It said this while carefully not meeting my eyes. I looked at it for a while. I'll go and look, I said. I'm not promising a fight. The hill was not small. Nothing lived on it. No birds, no insects, no green. Just bare gray stone and a silence so total that my own breathing sounded rude. Halfway up, I understood why. Because halfway up, the thing that ruled the hill stood and turned to look at us. It was a golem, head and shoulders taller than any man, taller than the wyvern I'd killed. A body of joined mineral plates gone dark and mossy with age, moving with a low grinding sound like a mountain deciding to walk. I had faced dangerous things in that forest. Every one of them had a limit I could feel. This thing didn't. Looking at it was like looking at a cliff and being asked to wrestle it. I turned to say a short and unkind word to the goblin about its great idea. The golem tore a full-grown tree out of the ground by the roots and threw it at us. There was no time to be clever. I ran. The trunk came through the air the size of a battering ram, and I dove, and it went over me close enough to feel the wind of it, and it exploded against the stone behind me into a hail of splinters. I rolled, came up moving, kept moving, because the thing was already stepping after me, and the ground shook with every step. And that was when I felt Slappy come off my head. The throw had jarred him loose. He'd bounced off my shoulder mid-dive, and now he was on the open stone between me and the golem, a small, helpless smear of light, squealing my name in the only word he had. And the golem's foot was coming up. Every sensible thing in me said run. He was a slime. I could find another. Run and live. I turned around and went back for him. I don't have a grand reason. I've turned it over since, and it always comes out the same and simple. He'd warned me about the knife at my neck. He covered my blind side every day and asked for nothing but water and to be allowed to spin. He had stayed. And I had just gotten done deciding in a muddy clearing that the ones who stay are the only ones worth anything at all. So I was not going to stand on a hill and prove myself a liar. I got a hand around him. The foot came down where he'd been. I felt the wind of that too. Then I was out of room. The golem filled the whole sky. Close now. One arm already drawing back, and there was nowhere left to run to. So I stopped running. I planted my feet, held the slime against my chest with my good arm, and opened my ruined hand at the mountain coming down on me. Bond summoning didn't need a corpse. I'd only ever used it on things I'd already beaten, but the rule had never actually said beaten. It said willing. And in the half second before that fist arrived, I felt something off the golem that stopped the breath in my throat. Not rage, not hunger. Underneath all that grinding stone, there was a voice, faint and old and unbelievably tired. And what it was saying was, I want to obey. I want to be useful, please. I offered it a contract. It said yes before I'd finished asking. The fist stopped. It stopped a body's length above my head and simply hung there. And then the whole enormous thing went still, and a long jet of white steam screamed out of its joints, and it sank down onto the stone with a groan like the earth settling. For a moment, nothing moved on that whole silent hill. Then a seam of light opened down the front of its chest. The chest split. The plates folded back like a door I hadn't known was a door, and out of the dark inside the golem, out of the middle of 2,000 years of moss and cracked mineral, a girl stepped down onto the stone. She was small, silver hair that caught the last red light and threw it back wrong, too bright, like metal pretending to be hair. Eyes the deep red of old wine. Clothes I had no name for, cut in a fashion no tailor in the kingdom had ever made. Plain, informal, and impossibly old. She looked me over the way a soldier looks over an officer, and then she bowed at a precise angle, and she thanked me for registering as her master. I stood there holding a slime, a goblin peering out from behind my leg, and said nothing at all for a while. She filled the silence for me, briskly. She was not, she said, a human woman. She was an automaton, a thinking machine built to look like one. And the golem I had just spared was not a monster, but her combat shell, a heavy model she called the Titan. She apologized for its condition. It had, she informed me in the flat tone of someone reporting the weather, been running without a break for something over 18 million hours, and its performance had fallen below half of what it was meant to be, so she feared she might not be truly useful to me. 18 million hours. I did the arithmetic slowly, and it kept coming out to the same impossible number, and I looked at the mossy husk she had just climbed out of with a feeling I couldn't name. 2,000 years. This small formal person had stood on this dead hill in a rotting suit of armor for 2,000 years, guarding something, because nobody had ever come to tell her she could stop. The bond had opened new doors, the way it always did. 3 of them this time. 3 shapes waiting behind my dead hand. the Titan, and 2 others she named as an eagle and an orca, whatever those would turn out to be. But it was the Titan I reached for, because the one she had was falling apart around her, and I'd just watched her apologize for it. I opened my hand and summoned a fresh one. It came up out of the ground pristine, the same towering shape as the ruin behind us, but clean. Its plates a bright, unbroken gray. No moss, no cracks, gleaming in the last of the light like it had been built that morning. The girl's red eyes went wide, and for the first time, the crisp report dropped out of her voice. "Master," she breathed, and there was something almost helpless in it. With this, we can draw out the full performance." She climbed up into the new shell, and the chest sealed around her, and the thing rose. Where the old golem had ground and lurched, this one moved. It turned its great head, flexed one enormous hand, took a step that landed light as a cat, and I understood that the wyvern-killing terror that had nearly ended me on this hill had been a broken, exhausted, 2,000-year-old fraction of what this small person could actually do. Then she stepped back out of it, down onto the stone in front of me, and she asked me for one more thing. Not a weapon, not a repair, a name. She had guarded a place until the place became a forest, she told me, plain and quiet now. She had kept her orders long after the ones who gave them turned to dust, and it was my summoning that had finally reached in and released her from them. She had served a purpose for 2,000 years, she said, and in all that time, nobody had ever thought to give her a name. I looked at her, and I thought about a man who'd had a family name taken off his shoulders like a borrowed coat, and how little a name is, and how much. "Corinne," I said. She said it back to herself once, testing it, and then something moved across that composed old face that I don't think had moved in a very long time. A furious squawk went up from around my knee. The goblin wanted it on the record that IT had been my senior, my very first proud retainer, and it had gone this whole time without so much as a title while the newcomer got named on sight. And this was an outrage. This was favoritism. This was Goblina, I said. It stopped mid-rant. It turned the word over. It tried it on. Goblina. It decided out loud that it was a magnificent name, the best name, obviously a name for someone important, and it strutted off to tell the knife about it. Something wet and insistent bumped the side of my head. Slappy. Waiting. He'd had his name since the night we met, but he wasn't about to be left out of a ceremony. Slappy, I said again, and he lit up so hard he nearly rolled off my shoulder, spinning in a delighted circle and spraying cold water over all of us like the world's smallest storm. I stood on that dead hill in the dusk and counted them. A slime nobody would have missed. A goblin its own kind had left to die. A guardian the world had forgotten on purpose for 2,000 years. Not one of them had been wanted by anybody, anywhere, until they were wanted by me. 3 years ago, a room full of important people had looked at me and decided I was worth nothing and thrown me away. I was beginning to think they'd thrown away the wrong thing. The 4 of us went down off the hill together in the last of the light, and behind us, the old broken shell sat empty in the dark, and none of us looked back at it. The morning after I gave them their names, the skill moved under me like a floor settling. It wasn't a level. I'd gotten used to levels. A number ticks, a summon gets bigger. This was a rank, and Corinne told me why before I could ask. Giving the 3 of them names had pulled the bonds tighter, and tight bonds, apparently, ranked the whole thing up. She said it the way she says everything, flat and certain, like she was reading it off a plate in her own chest. The new trick had a plain name, composite summoning. Pull on 2 bonds at once instead of 1, and the skill hands you something neither could give alone. So I tried it. I reached for Corinne and Goblina together, held my dead right hand open the way I always do, and the cold came into my palm and coughed out. A chainsaw. I barely had it a heartbeat before Goblina took it off me. What happened next was less like logging and more like a small green disaster with opinions. She went through the tree line howling with joy, and trees came down that I had not agreed to, and every time I told her to ease up, she pretended the engine was too loud to hear me. "That is enough timber for a house, master," Corinne said, watching a pine topple. "It would be a waste not to use it. I'd built log houses before, on guild work, back when I still had a name and a family and a right hand that closed. I didn't say that part. I just said I knew how. We had it up by dusk. Slappy ran water for us by the barrel. That's his whole gift. Water out of nothing, endless, and Goblina cut, and Corinne set the logs like she'd done it 1,000 years ago, which for all I knew she had. a real house. Walls, a door, a roof that would shed rain. Then I opened that door and stood in a completely empty room, and the first thing I felt, standing in my own house in the middle of a monster forest, was that I needed to fill it. Filling it started with a bath, because I made the mistake of taking one the lazy way. I had Slappy just sluice me down with a wave of cold water. Fast, done. Corinne watched this the way a duchess watches someone eat with their hands. She informed me that my methods were uncultured and that she would not stand for it, and then she fixed the problem the only way she knows how, which is completely. She dug a pit beside the house. She lined it with flat stones. She pulled Slappy into a composite summon, and the two of them poured out cement, sealing the gaps, and she filled the whole thing with water and heated it from inside herself. Some old drive in her chest that turns power into heat. She overdid it. Of course she overdid it. The bath came to a rolling boil, and I had to stand there in a towel explaining that humans cook in that, and we waited a good while for it to come down to something a person could sit in. But when it did, it was good. Better than good. Slappy had picked up a new trick somewhere in all this. He could pull hot water from famous springs of a world that isn't ours, places with names like Baden and Yellowstone, warm and mineral and impossible. I sat in impossible water on a hill in a killing forest and felt, for a minute, like a lord. Corinne tried to attend me the entire time. It's an automaton's duty, she said, never to leave her master's side. I told her, gently, because she meant it with her whole ancient heart, that I trusted her completely, and she had nothing left to prove to me. She went quiet at that in a way that wasn't like a machine at all. What none of us clocked that warm evening was that we were being watched. Down in the dark tree line, something had counted us, and noticed the giant that used to guard this hill was simply gone, and decided the land was there for the taking. They came the next morning, and they came in numbers. Wolves, but not the kind you throw a rock at. Hell wolves, Corinne called them. Forest-grown things the size of ponies, fur laid over them like plate, fangs that showed when they grinned. They came up the slope in a gray tide and ringed the hill, and at the front of them, one lifted her head and spoke in a human tongue. She named herself their pack leader. She told me, more or less, that the giant who kept this hill was gone, that the strong take from the weak, and that I was standing on land that now belonged to her. Gablina bounced on her heels beside me, thrilled, asking if it was finally time. Slappy squared himself into a fighting little knot at my feet. I didn't need either of them. Corinne stepped forward, and the air behind her folded, and she called up the shell. I'd seen the Titan before. I still wasn't ready for it in daylight. Gray plates the height of 3 men snapping into place around her out of nothing, gleaming, silent where the old mossy husk on this hill had ground and groaned. It rose over the wolves like a moving cliff, and then it moved like a cat, light, fast, wrong for its size. The pack leader had time to understand what she'd walked into. Just time, no more. Then the Titan went through the hell wolves the way weather goes through a field. It was not a fight. A sweep of one great arm and the tide broke. Wolves that had been snarling a breath ago were tumbling back down the slope they'd climbed, and the ones that held their ground did not hold it long. Corinne never raised her voice. She just corrected the misunderstanding, plate and fist, until the hill was quiet again and only the leader was left, pinned, panting, and still alive because Corinne had decided she should be. Corinne brought her to me held fast, out of the shell now, back in the shape of a silver-haired girl who could carry a wolf the size of a horse under one arm without effort. She suggested plainly that I finish it. The wolf agreed with her. She wanted a clean death, an honorable one, and told me to get on with it. I didn't want to. It's a strange thing to explain. I've killed in that forest without losing a wink. A pack of goblins had tried to open my throat not long before, and I'd put them down and slept fine. But this one had talked. This one had walked up the hill herself, out in front, for her pack. Killing something that could reason with me sat wrong, and I've learned to trust the things that sit wrong. So I offered her the other door, a bond, serve instead of die. She threw it back at me, told me, in so many words, not to waste my breath, that a feeble human wasn't worth her surrender. Corinne went cold in a way I hadn't seen from her. She asked the wolf what way was that to speak to her master, and I watched it land. Watched this proud creature understand that the girl who had just erased her whole pack knelt to me, called me that, meant it. I didn't give her time to chew on it. I reached out with my dead hand and closed the contract while the shock was still on her face. The contract took And then it did something I hadn't asked for. The wolf came apart in light and stood up a woman, wolf ears still on her head, a tail behind her, but a woman on 2 feet, blinking at her own hands. I asked her, a little strangled, why she'd gone and turned human, and she had no more idea than I did. That's not a thing bond summoning is supposed to do. It keeps doing things it isn't supposed to do. She took a knee in the trampled grass and pledged herself, and on her word, the whole Hellwolf tribe. The survivors of the tide that had just tried to eat me came padding back up the slope with their ears down, and inside an hour, they were flopped all over my hill like it had always been theirs. I found out what a bond with a wolf summons too. Not water, not a blade. Kibble. Great pouring drifts of dry brown kibble, and the pack lost their minds for it. So there I was, feeding hellwolves out of my dead hand, while their leader, who'd sworn to fight for me until death not 20 minutes back, demanded I scratch her behind the ears. Vera, she called herself now. She told me, glowing, that a lord who could give his people safe land and clean water and food would be king of this forest one day. I didn't argue. It seemed rude to argue with someone that happy. And then, because the forest apparently has a sense of humor, it happened again, only with stripes. A few days on, another leader climbed my hill to claim it, a tiger this time, big as the wolves and twice as sure of herself, a whole king tiger group at her back, announcing that the land was theirs now. I barely had to move. Corinne stepped out, and the tiger got about one proud sentence into her speech before Corinne put the entire group flat on the grass, gently, the way you'd fold laundry. You know the rest, because by then so did I. I offered the door. The tiger, smarter than her mouth, took it. The contract snapped shut. The light took her, and she stood up a woman with cat ears and a lazy grin, purring that a master this strong might be worth sticking around for. Her name was Tara, and she and Vera hated each other on sight, one all pride and posture, the other all teasing, and they were bickering over who ranked higher in my house before Tara's tail had finished twitching. I broke it up the only way that worked, which was with treats, something sweet Slappy could pour by the cup. Both of them forgot the war instantly, so that was my hill. A slime, a goblin, a 2,000-year-old machine, a wolf, and a tiger. Every one of them something the world had thrown out, or wanted to. I stood in the middle of the racket and could not stop grinning. I wasn't there for any of what came next. I was on my hill, feeding wolves, but I know how it went now, and it's worth telling slow, because it's the closest thing to justice I got for a long while, and I didn't even have to lift a hand. While I was building a home out of the things nobody wanted, the home I'd been thrown out of was quietly coming apart. It started with my father going to see Marcus. Marcus, my second brother, the one who overturned a table for me the night they wrote me off, had gotten himself posted to the frontier, a border garrison, the kind of assignment they hand out as punishment. My father went storming out there to demand why a son of his would throw away a good career for a dirty little post at the edge of nowhere. He got his answer, and it wasn't the one he wanted. Marcus told him, flat, that he had requested the border himself, that it put him at the doorstep of the Great Wood, that he'd gone looking for me. My father tried the old lever, his pride, his expectations, his many capable sons, and it didn't catch on anything anymore. Marcus told him he'd stopped caring about his expectations, that spending his hours on his father was a waste of them. Ethan is my brother, he said. For him, I'll spend whatever it takes. As far as I'm concerned, I'm the only one left in the world on his side. My father had no answer to that. He went home to the one place he still felt like a great man. He should have stayed at the garrison. He came home expecting his wife. He got Victor instead. My eldest brother was sitting in the hall when my father walked in. Victor, the genius, a night order commander before most men make officer, cold all the way through in a way that made our father look warm by comparison. He was waiting. He had things to say, and he said them in order, the way he did everything. The first was our mother. Eleanor was gone. She had taken Lily, our little sister, the one who cried and clutched my sleeve the night I left. And she had walked out of the marriage she'd endured in silence for 30 years. Victor gave her message without softening a word of it, that she had done her duty as a wife, and swallowed it all, year after year, but that the day her husband threw away her son Ethan was the day the last of her feeling for him died, that she would not raise a child in his house, that she was raising Lily somewhere else now. My father was still trying to breathe around that when Victor moved to the second thing, the headship. He wanted it, not asked, told. He informed our father that since Victor was 10 years old, the man had been the lesser of the two of them in every way that could be measured, that he had never once accomplished a single thing on his own, that he'd only ever been a frame around his son's portraits, and a frame that useless, Victor said, had no business calling itself the head of anything. Then he told him to sign it over, and my father, who an hour earlier had a wife, 4 sons, a daughter, and a name people bowed to, handed the last of it to a boy who felt nothing looking at him. Here's the part I keep coming back to. Every bit of it came from one thing. He'd had a family that held together, and it held together around a single agreement that I was the failure, the cripple, the one you could throw away to feel taller. The day he actually threw me away, the glue was gone. Marcus went looking for me. My mother left for me. Victor stopped pretending the frame was worth the wall. And my father sat alone in a hall the size of a church and understood at last that the most useless man in his perfect family had been him all along. He'd measured me wrong 3 years running. It cost him everything he'd measured. None of that reached me on my hill that night. It would, in pieces, later. That night, I only had the house. The windows were lit. Goblina was sharpening something that didn't need sharpening. Corinne was fussing over a supper nobody had asked for. Vera and Tara were arguing about which of them got to sleep nearest the door. And Slappy sat glowing quietly by the fire like a lamp somebody loved. 3 years ago, a hall full of important people had decided I was worth nothing and thrown me out. Somewhere behind me, that same hall was falling in on the man who'd done it. And here I was, on a hill in a forest that wanted me dead, richer than I had ever been in that house, in a home I built with my own hands, full of everything the world had discarded, and not one of us looking back. I told them I was going to town, and 2 of them started crying. Vera reached me first, both fists knotted in my coat. Tara wrapped around the other arm. Between the wolf ears and the cat ears, and the noise they were making, you'd have thought I'd announced I was dying. I hadn't. I said it plainly. I had an errand in town, and I would come back before they'd finished missing me. That only made them hold on harder. Vera pulled herself together enough to offer a compromise. She would come as my guard. I told her no. A wolf the size of a pony, walking through a human gate, would empty the streets before I got 10 steps. She took that badly, but she took it. Then she suggested that someone should be left in charge while I was gone, and nominated herself on the strength of having served me first. Tara's name went in right on top of hers. She'd led a whole clan of tigers, she reminded everyone, so leadership was more or less her birthright. They went at it after that, wolf discipline against tiger instinct, rank, and precedence, who had bowed to me sooner. I stood in the middle of it and listened, and the longer I listened, the more certain I became that neither of them should ever be allowed within reach of power. So I named Slappy deputy. They both went quiet. Slappy, my first bond, a round of clear jelly, who had never once asked me for anything, wobbled up between the 2 of them and gave one bright, confident chirp. Vera drew breath to argue, looked down at him, and let it go. Tara did the same. For reasons neither of them could have explained, the slime was the one among us they both trusted. That settled it. Corinne stepped forward and said she would be coming with me because she had a faster way down the mountain than my own 2 feet. The faster way turned out to be a bird made of steel. It came together out of nothing at her word. A great mechanical eagle, wings wider than my house, plating bright and unbroken the way the Titans had been before I ever saw it. There was one cockpit. It was built for one. Corinne folded herself into the pilot's cradle and told me, in that flat, courteous voice, to get in behind her. "There is room, master," she said, which was a generous reading of the situation. I have been in tighter spots. I could not at that moment remember any of them. Then the wings snapped down and the ground fell away, and I stopped thinking about the fit. We went up like a thrown stone. The forest that had taken me days to cross the first time shrank to a green stain under us, then a smear, then nothing I could pick a landmark out of. The wind pressed my face into the back of her seat. Something in my chest tried to relocate to my spine. By the time the town came into view on the horizon, I had decided several things about my life, chief among them that I would find some other way home. We set down early, out past sight of the walls, because a steel bird landing at the gate would have started exactly the kind of morning I was trying to avoid. That left the walking. It also left the problem of Corinne. Her own attire, the close-fitting old-world thing she'd stepped out of the golem in, did not read as clothing to anyone from this century. It read as a spectacle. She would have collected a crowd before the second street, so I gave her my cloak. I settled it over her shoulders and pulled the hood up myself, and when she looked at me, I told her the truth of it. "I want to be the one who clothes you. Is that all right?" She held very still, the way she does when something lands harder than I mean it to, and said it was. Red March sat on the border where the kingdom stopped, and and the Great Wood began, a frontier town wearing a fortress like a coat, thick walls, more soldiers than shopkeepers. Corinne studied it through the gate and remarked, without unkindness, that people had built taller in her day. I let that one lie. We had money to earn first, and I was broke to the last coin. The guild was the fastest way to turn what I'd hauled out of the forest into coin, so that's where we went. I was 3 steps through the door when a voice cracked across the hall and asked if that was Ethan. And there was Walter behind the counter, polishing rag frozen in his hand, staring at me like I'd walked in off a funeral pyre. He came around the counter faster than a man his size should move. He'd transferred out here from the capital, he told me, all the way to the border, because he'd been worried sick. Then he told me the part I hadn't known. 4 whole months, boy, he said, and his voice went thick. You walked into the Great Wood 4 months ago, and nobody heard a word. I did the arithmetic, and it didn't fit anything I'd felt. Weeks, I'd have sworn. A search quest had been posted for me, rank C, a standing reward of 4,000 gold to whoever brought word I was alive. Corinne, from under the hood, observed that this was tidy. Could I not simply accept the quest myself, she asked, and collect the reward for the labor of being found? That's fraud, I said, and told her we weren't doing that. She accepted the ruling with visible regret. Walter's face had gone to pieces somewhere in the middle of all this. I moved us along before he could fully dissolve. I had materials to sell, and I opened my ruined right hand and called up the way I carry them now. A box unfolded out of the air, no bigger than a chest, holding a great deal more than a chest should. 57 kill crabs, 107 armorfish, raw adamantite ore, and elixir grass by the bundle, every piece of it already cleaned and cut. The rag dropped out of Walter's hand. He asked very carefully whether I had gone past the safety line. I told him I had. He looked at the haul and looked at me and said he'd get it appraised. And, since I asked him to, that he'd leave the family name off the ledger. I don't carry it anymore. While the appraisal ran, we went to buy Corinne something to wear that wasn't my cloak. This took longer than the flight. Left to choose for herself, she gravitated straight to the flimsiest, most impractical scraps in the shop and held each one up for my approval with total seriousness. I vetoed every one of them and told her more than once that the item in her hands was barely clothing at all. She settled in the end on a maid's uniform. It was the standard dress of a servant, she informed me, and it suited her purpose. Obedience made visible, and, more to the point, a cut that left her free to connect to her shells underneath. I paid for it out of money I did not technically have yet. She smoothed the skirt down with both hands and looked, for the first time since we'd landed, entirely satisfied. Then we walked back to the guild to collect my coin, and Walter met us at the door and told me the payment was off. Why, was all I said. Not canceled, Walter was quick to add, held. They'd flagged it mid-appraisal and frozen the whole lot, and it was out of his hands. The branch chief wanted to see me himself, and there'd be no money at all until I sat down across from the man. So I sat down. Barrett was built like a retired siege engine, and he did not waste my time. He laid my own haul out between us like evidence. The kill crab, he said, was a B-rank monster, a real one, with a shell that turned steel, and there was no record anywhere of one being pulled out of the Great Wood. Same for the adamantite, same for the elixir grass, top-rank materials, all of them, from a forest that was supposed to hold none, brought in by an E-rank nobody in quantities that made the ledger look like a lie. I admitted I'd been careless. I'd hauled in too much, too openly, and I could see now what it looked like. Corinne did not care what it looked like. From beside me, she told him flatly that the fault was in his own eyes, not in her master, and that he shouldn't blame me for failing to see what was in front of him. Barrett asked whether I'd gone into the unexplored deep. I said I had. That, he explained, was the crux of it. What I'd seen out there could rewrite everything the guild thought it knew about the Great Wood, and he was obligated to put it on record. Then Walter, trying to help, let slip that I'd once been a night school student. Something moved behind the chief's face at that. He'd apparently no love for knights. He smiled, and it was not a warm smile, and he said that a former night school reject turning up with an unexplored region in his pockets was exactly the kind of talent he refused to let rot at the bottom rank. So here was his offer. I would take a promotion exam today, right now, and if I refused it, he was pleasant about this, which was somehow worse. Then he would refuse to buy a single crab off me. I had come to sell some monster parts and go home. I had said out loud that I wanted no rank and no attention. He'd heard me say it. He overruled it to my face and waited, and the waiting was the whole trap. I felt my jaw set. Beside me, Corinne said quietly that we should do it. Walter would not meet my eye. Fine, I said. I'll take it. Walter caught me on the way out and swore he'd only come to give me good news. He knew I hated standing where people could look at me. But rank, he said, wasn't only a title. Climb high enough, and the guild handed you solo access to the hard quests, the right to raise your own company, and, the part that turned me, advance funding before a job instead of coins scraped together after. Money up front that I could use. So I let them walk me out to the training ground, where a crowd had already gathered along the fence, hungry for a show. The chief laid out the rules simply enough. One fight at a time, starting at D rank. Beat the D, they'd hand me a C to fight. Beat the C, a B after that, climbing until I lost, and wherever I lost was the rank I'd keep. He said, mildly, that he hoped I'd make it at least to B. I did the math the crowd couldn't see. Corinne could end every man in that ring without changing her expression, and I would sooner cut my own throat than show them that. The Titan stayed a secret. The full reach of what I can call up stayed a secret. Win, I decided, but win small and lose somewhere sensible before this became a story that followed me home. They sent out a D rank first, a broad slab of a man with a club and a grudge. He looked me over, said something about how small the great explorer turned out to be, and rolled his shoulders. Then they gave the word, and he came at me with real killing intent, the club already dropping toward the crown of my head. I stepped inside it. There was time. There's always more time than people think, and I opened my working left hand and called a knife into it, a bright, short blade out of a bond he'd never guess I had. His swing was still finishing when the edge found the side of his neck. Don't move, I said. He didn't. The club hung in the dead air above us. His eyes came down to the steel at his throat and stayed there, and every loud thing he'd said a breath ago had left him. I stepped back and let him breathe. The crowd made the noise crowds make. Barrett was watching me the way a man watches a card he's decided not to show yet, and I understood, standing there, that I'd just made this worse. One knife, one heartbeat, and I hadn't even used the hand they'd all agreed was ruined. D rank was mine, which only meant the next man was already being sent for, and behind him a C, and behind the C, the long climb toward a rank that would put a leash on me and call it an honor. I flexed the stiff fingers of my right hand, where nobody was looking, and kept it secret a little longer. The ranger came at me one more time, quick and low the way he'd come at me 40 times already, and I let him. That was the whole trick of it. He was faster than me, and he knew it, so he'd spent the match darting in, cutting once, and skipping back out of reach before I could answer. Clever, also tiring for him, and I had nothing to do but breathe and wait. When his feet finally started landing a half-beat slow, I stopped giving ground, caught his wrist on the way in, and put my blade flat along his neck before he'd finished the step. He went still. The judge called it. Nobody clapped. Somewhere up in the gallery, a man announced to his neighbors that it had been the most boring fight of his life, and his neighbors agreed. Another one said the returner was a fraud. They'd all heard the story, the nobody who walked out of the unexplored region, and this limp little win was what all the noise was about. He'd expected fire. He'd gotten a man outlasting a tired ranger. Let them talk. My legs were shaking and I didn't want them to see it. I opened my left hand at my side and pulled a bottle of cold water out of the empty air, the way I did now without thinking, and drank half of it in one go. A towel arrived at my shoulder before I asked for one. You are low on breath, master, Corinne said, blotting my neck with the brisk care of someone dusting a shelf. Your stamina was never your strength. It got me through. It will not get you through the next one. She said it plainly, no cruelty in it, the way she said most things. She was right, and I knew who the next one would be. C rank done. That meant a B rank was already being fetched from wherever the guild kept them, and a B rank swordsman would not politely wear himself out on my patience. I flexed the fingers of my left hand around the bottle and did the arithmetic of a fight I was probably going to lose. Corinne was folding the towel when she stopped and looked at me, really looked, in that unblinking way of hers that took inventory. Master, may I ask a question? I told her she always did whether I said yes or not. Are you right-handed? I didn't answer right away, and that was an answer. She kept going, gentle and exact, laying it out like she'd been collecting the pieces for a while. Every draw, every parry, every summon, all of it left. I ate with my left. I opened doors with my left. And when I did use the right for anything, my face changed for half a breath. A small flinch I thought I'd trained out of myself years ago. She'd been watching that flinch, she said, and she wanted to understand it. So I told her, flatly, because that was the only way I could still say it. It was a minor accident, years ago. I turned my right hand over on my knee, palm up. The fingers curled the way they always curled now, halfway, unwilling to go the rest. The hand healed. The grip didn't come back. I have almost nothing in it. I can hold a fork if I concentrate. I can't hold a sword. So I stopped being right-handed and I taught myself to be someone else. I'd said it like a fact about the weather. I'd had 3 years to sand the feeling off the words. Corinne didn't offer me pity, which I was grateful for. She tilted her head, considering, and then asked me to do something strange. She asked me to summon through her bond. Not for a weapon, not for water, but just to reach for whatever came up. She had a feeling, she said, and her feelings came from a place I still didn't understand. I reached, and something new was there. Not a knife, not a blade. When it settled into my summoning, it came with a shape I could half see before I pulled it through. An object of dark, seamless metal, jointed like a hand, older than anything in this country by a margin I couldn't count. A gauntlet. Put it on, Corinne said, and for the first time, her voice had an edge of hurry in it. Your right hand. Quickly. I slid it over my ruined fingers. For a moment, nothing happened, and I felt like a fool sitting on a bench in front of a bored crowd with a dead man's glove on my useless hand. Then the metal went cool against my skin, cool and then faintly warm, and I felt it. A fine crawling wakefulness spreading down each finger. A hum I felt in the bone more than the flesh. It reads the signals your nerves still send, Corinne was saying, somewhere above me. Where the muscle no longer answers, it answers for you. They built these to give hands back. A long time ago. I wasn't listening. I was looking at my hand, because my index finger had just moved. Not much. A twitch. The kind of small, stupid motion a hand makes 10,000 times a day and never once thinks about. But this hand hadn't made it in 3 years. I told it to bend and it bent. I told my thumb to cross my palm and it crossed, smooth, like it had never forgotten. I sat there opening and closing my right hand, slow, over and over, feeling the joints roll shut and roll open. And something in my chest that I had bricked up very carefully a long time ago started coming apart at the seams. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to say I did. What I did was breathe wrong for a while and stare at 5 fingers doing the one thing I had stopped letting myself want. Corinne crouched down and put a real sword into that hand. Just a plain guild practice blade, borrowed off the rack. I closed my fingers around the grip. It held. 3 years. 3 years of watching my left hand fake a life the right one used to lead. 3 years of a father's voice calling that a disgrace. And now a hilt sat in my right palm, and my hand simply held it, the way it was built to, the way it was supposed to, and I could have wept in front of the entire guild and not cared. I turned my wrist and the blade moved where I wanted it. It went where I looked. It had been so long since a sword had gone where I looked. Master, Corinne said quietly, you are ready for the next match. I closed my hand tighter until the grip creaked, just to feel it hold. And of course, holding that hilt, I remembered exactly how I'd lost the use of it. I was 15. The academy held its tournament every year, 1 champion crowned per grade, and every year, my father sat in the stands and watched me place second, twice. To him, it might as well have been last. A son of his was a champion, or a son of his was nothing, and he'd told me which one I was on the ride home both years. So the 3rd year, I went out there to win, and the boy standing across the sand from me was Prince Roland. He was the top of the golden class, the year everyone still talks about, a cohort thick with prodigies, and him standing over all of them like they were furniture. He'd beaten me both previous years without breaking his careful, bored expression. He wasn't cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. He was simply better, and he knew it the way you know your own name, and he'd already half turned to bow to the stands before our matches were finished. The blades were blunted practice steel. That's the thing people forget. Blunted, but in the hands of someone strong enough, a blunt sword doesn't cut you, it breaks you. I attacked first, harder than I had any right to, because my father was watching and I could not go home second again. I overcommitted. Roland read it the way he read everything, stepped off the line, and brought his practice blade down across my extended sword hand in a single clean stroke. I heard it before I felt it. The teachers stopped the match. That was the rule, that was the right call, and I should have let them. My hand was already wrong, the fingers not answering, a white noise climbing my arm. But my father was on his feet at the rail, and I could see his face, and I said the words that ruined me. I said I could still fight. I told them a wound that small would make me useless in a real battle if I let it stop me. I told them to let it continue. And Roland asked, given the choice by teachers, too frightened of his crown to overrule him. Roland agreed, calm, analytical. He looked at my ruined hand and my shaking legs and my father screaming encouragement from the rail, and he decided the match should go on. It went on. I fought a prince one-handed and half in shock, and I lost the way a candle loses to weather, and by the time it ended, The damage to my right hand had gone from bad to permanent. The grip never came back. The career built on that grip ended on that sand, at 15, in front of everyone I knew. My father disowned me for it in the carriage before we'd even reached the gate. I was a disgrace. I was an unsightly, shameful defeat. I was no longer his son. I'd hear the full weight of that sentence again 3 years later, but it started there. There was exactly one person who came to the infirmary after, my brother Marcus, broad and clumsy and guilty, who'd won his own bracket that day and couldn't look at me while he did it. He didn't have the words. He never did. He just sat with me until they made him leave. Everyone in that arena agreed the prince had made me nothing. Nobody asked what I'd do with the other hand. I'd taught myself not to say his name, Roland. I'd packed the whole afternoon into a box and stopped opening it, because opening it did nothing but hurt, and hurt bought me no bread. But sitting in the Red March Guild with a working right hand for the first time since that day, I said it once, in the quiet of my own skull, and I let it stay said. The debt didn't get any smaller because I'd stopped looking at it. It had just been waiting, the way the hum at the back of my head had been waiting, for the day I'd finally have a hand to collect it with. The guild staff called me back to the sand. My break was over, time for the B rank. His name was Ryan, and he was everything I'd been raised to become. A proper swordsman, noble in the bearing, the river flow style clean off the rack of some good school. He gave me a small correct bow. He'd heard I was a returner, and he intended to be the one who exposed me, politely, in 3 moves. I held the borrowed sword in my right hand, and I let him come. He opened with a textbook thrust, exactly the form, exactly the tempo, and something old and buried woke up to meet it. My father may have thrown me out, but he'd spent my whole childhood drilling the Iron Veil style into me before the hand died, and took it with him. Footwork, wrist work, the whole grammar of it locked in a hand I hadn't been able to speak with in 3 years. I spoke with it now. I slid inside his thrust, turned my wrist the way the Iron Veil style turns it, and let my blade climb the length of his in a rising spiral that peeled the weapon straight out of his grip. Vine strike. His sword went cartwheeling across the sand, and mine came to rest, light as a resting bird, against the top of his shoulder. The whole thing took less time than it takes to describe it. Ryan stared at the empty air where his sword had been. Then he looked at the way I was standing, right foot forward, right hand leading, and I watched him understand that the boring man from the last match and the man in front of him were using 2 different hands. The Iron Veil style, he said, half to himself. Vine strike. He stepped back and lowered his head. I concede. The gallery wasn't bored anymore. I flexed my right hand around the grip once, just to feel it answer, and thought, quietly, so my face wouldn't show it, that I would very much like to be done for the day now. I was not going to be done for the day. Before I could leave the sand, a woman walked onto it. She was tall and unbothered and dressed for range, not for melee, and she introduced herself the way people introduce a fact. Charlotte, an A-rank mage. She'd been on standby, she said, and if I could put her down, the A rank was mine outright. No paperwork, no waiting. She smiled when she said it, the way you smile at a man who's about to find out he's out of his depth. Then her feet left the ground. Floating magic. She rose a good body's height off the sand and hung there, out of reach, and the air around her bloomed with fire. A dozen orbs of it, then more, turning slowly, waiting. A swordsman's whole life is closing distance. She had just deleted the distance and put a wall of fire in it. I ran. There wasn't much else to do at first but run and read the pattern, and the pattern was brutal. Fireballs came down where I'd been, where I was about to be, hurting me. I got my sword up to knock one off its line, and the blade drank the heat and kept it. The steel went from warm to searing in half a breath, and I had to let it fall before it took the skin off my palm, my good hand, my new hand. I dropped a hot sword and rolled, and the crowd made the sound crowds make when they think it's over. So I reached into the bond and asked for the answer. What came through was a blade with a long wavering pattern down the steel, and a feeling coming off it like clean air after rain. A pure edge that shoved magic back the way a stone shoves water. The Stormward blade. I came up out of the roll with it already swinging and cut the next fireball clean in half. The fire didn't burn the steel. It didn't do anything at all. It just came apart and went out, and the blade stayed cool in my grip. Charlotte's smile changed. She was safe up in the air, but up in the air was the whole problem for her, because a floating mage has to stay light, and a light body has no guard and nothing to brace against. I stopped chasing. I planted my feet, filled my left hand out of the empty air, and started throwing knives. I can pull a knife from nothing as fast as I can let go of the last one. She had no shield fast enough for that. The first one she twisted away from and her float wobbled. The second one she dodged and the wobble became a lurch. By the third, she was fighting her own magic just to stay up. And gravity was patient, and gravity won. She came down hard on the sand, and by the time she'd got her breath, the stormward blade was resting a hand's width from her throat. "That's a knife," she said, disgusted, like I'd cheated at cards. I told her it was. Yes, I lose. She let her head drop back against the sand. Under the annoyance, there was something else. A mage who just watched a swordsman walk into her range and take it away from her, filing me somewhere new. Walter got to me before the officials did, and the old man was crying again, openly, gripping my shoulders and telling anyone within earshot that he'd always known, that I was the real thing. I let him. He'd earned it, worrying about me for 4 months. Then Barrett came down off his chair with that hard, humorless satisfaction of a man whose gamble just paid, and told me what I'd been dreading since the first bout. An A rank in an afternoon, off the sand, against a live A rank mage. The branch chief said it plainly through that anti-knight grin of his. He would file for the A rank tonight, and there was only one rung left above it, and no active adventurer of that rank anywhere in the region. And the guild had wanted a new one for a long time. He'd be putting my name forward for the S rank exam too. I had come to this town to sell some monster parts and leave with a purse of coin. I said as much, once, without much hope. Barrett smiled like he hadn't heard me. He'd already decided. My fines, my forest, my name. He was going to write all of it into his ledger and write it as far as it would take him. And my wishes were a rounding error in that plan. Corinne stood at my shoulder, too loud and too proud, telling anyone who'd listen that her master had of course won. And I let the noise wash over me and looked at my own right hand instead. It was still holding a sword. It didn't shake. It went where I looked. I flexed the fingers once, closed and open, the way I'd been doing all afternoon, like a man making sure a dream was still there when he woke. Whatever leash the guild was about to put on me, whatever crown was about to notice a nobody climbing the ranks out on the frontier, I'd deal with all of it. I had a hand to deal with it now, and 100 miles of nothing away, across the frontier in the fortress town's cold garrison. A brother was hearing my name for the first time in months, hearing that his missing sibling had walked out of the deadliest forest in the world and was standing in a guild hall taking the S rank exam. I didn't know it yet. I didn't know Marcus had thrown away his own career to come looking, or that a guild man named Gordon had been searching the same trail, or that the two of them were already deciding to walk into the Great Wood after me. I only knew that for the first time in 3 years, my sword hand closed when I told it to, that the man who'd taken it from me finally had a name I let myself say, and that whatever came next, I'd meet it with the hand everyone had agreed was ruined. I closed it once more, and it held. I'd meant to be gone from town before anyone could ask me another question, and I'd managed it, barely, which was how I ended up back on the hill with an armload of furniture I hadn't measured. The dining room made that clear the moment I set the table down. It was built for 10. The room was built for maybe 4. It sat there like a landed barge, and I had to turn sideways to get around it. "The master is tired from his trip," Corinne announced, sweeping in. She'd changed into the black and white maid uniform I'd bought her, and she turned once so I couldn't miss it. "You noticed. I can tell you noticed." I noticed. I told her so. It seemed safer than the alternative. Vera and Tara noticed nothing about the dress. They noticed me. Vera pressed her shoulder into my side, tail going, and reported that they had guarded the house flawlessly and would now like to be scratched behind the ears as payment. Tara wanted a treat instead, and said so twice. Then I pulled the bed out of storage, and the mattress that came with it was wrong for the frame by a full hand's width. I stood there looking at it. Somewhere in town, between the promotion exam and fleeing the promotion exam, I had bought a bed and a mattress that had never once met. Too much money, not enough time. That was the whole problem in a sentence. The material exchange had paid out more than I knew what to do with, and I'd spent it the way a man spends money he's trying to get away from. Slappy wobbled up, glowing, and chirped that the house had been kept in perfect order in my absence. I praised the captain. The captain vibrated. I was going to have to go back to town. The thought sat in me like cold soup. The furniture problem solved itself, which is to say, Gablina solved it. I'd asked her to build a table, mostly to give her something to do. She came back inside the hour with one that matched the store's work, and then produced a set of matching chairs she'd made while I was still admiring the table. I told her it was good. I meant it. She scowled at me like I'd insulted her mother. "This isn't what a goblin should be doing," she said, dropping her plane on the bench. Goblins raided. Goblins terrorized. Goblins did not sand table legs to a nice finish and wait to be complimented on the grain. She'd been fading into the furniture, her word, while wolves and tigers and an automaton crowded the house, and nobody remembered she was even there. I opened my mouth to say that wasn't true, and realized I couldn't actually remember what she'd been doing for the last stretch of days. "Quietly processing materials for the exchange," she informed me. And yes, I told her, that quiet work was exactly what the guild had praised, exactly what had bumped my exchange value up. It was a real compliment, and she took it like one, chest puffing. Then she said it still wasn't enough. She said she'd been experimenting. The light came off her all at once, bright enough that I threw a hand up. When it faded, a woman stood where the goblin had been, green-skinned still but human-shaped, grinning with every ounce of her crooked pride intact. Bond summoning could reshape a contracted partner's form, she explained, pleased with herself. She'd always been female under it, and the shape had only been waiting for her to reach for it. She asked, teasing, whether that made the two of us a good match now. I said I'd known she was female for a while. I did not answer the other part. It seemed like the sort of thing that got worse the more you engaged with it. Corinne chose that moment to arrive with a tablecloth, saw the table was finished, and moved to cover it immediately, unbothered by the miracle standing next to it. Corinne had built a whole kitchen while I wasn't looking. Water, a stove, shelves. She'd gathered eggs, and she wanted to cook for me. I sat down like a man who had survived 3 years on dried rations and wild roots, because I had, and I waited. She set an omelet in front of me. Then she stopped my fork with one hand and told me it wasn't finished. She drew a heart on it in ketchup, closed her eyes, and chanted something about growing delicious. Love, love, yum, which she assured me was an ancient spell of great importance. I chose to believe her. I never got to taste it. Tara and Vera came in on the smell, snatched the plate, and had it gone between them before Corinne could turn around. Then they reviewed it. Bland, Tara decided. Overcooked, Vera added. Texture too firm. Corinne went the specific white of an automaton whose honor has been insulted, threatened to put on her Titan shell about it, and chased the pair of them out into the dark instead. Gablina stepped over the wreckage, cleaned the pan, and made me one out of leftover crab meat from a kill crab we'd taken weeks back. It was, genuinely, the best thing I'd eaten in years. She reminded me she was still the most wicked goblin alive, that this was destruction and not cooking, and went back to her onion soup. Slappy contributed by swallowing a raw egg whole and, after a thoughtful pause, spitting it back out perfectly soft-boiled. I asked how. Slappy did not explain. I was full and warm and half-laughing when Vera came back through the door. And this time, she wasn't chasing anyone. She'd gone stiff, ears up. Someone was in the territory, something the wolves had already run down. The wolves had a man by the collar. They dragged him up the slope and dropped him in the dirt at my feet, then sat back on their haunches, tails sweeping, checking my face to see if they'd done well. I summoned a handful of treats out of the air and told them they had. They melted. The man didn't move. He was armored under all the filth, real plate, the kind knights wear in the capital, and no armor like that should have gotten this deep into the great wood with its owner still breathing. Amateurs die at the tree line here. Whoever he was, he'd walked a very long way to end up unconscious on my hill. I had Slappy rinse him down, low pressure, and the mud came off in sheets. Under a beard gone 4 months wild, there was a face. I summoned the Stormward blade, which will take a whisker off as easily as a blood spear, and worked the beard away slow and careful, and the face kept getting more familiar the longer I looked, until it stopped being a stranger's at all. I knew that jaw. I'd grown up across a dinner table from that jaw. Marcus, I said, out loud, to no one, because he was still out. He came around on a cup of summoned water, coughing, blinking up at the canopy. He didn't know where he was. He thanked me, whoever I was, for pulling him out of the forest. He said he'd gotten himself lost looking for his younger brother, a man named Ethan, and asked if I'd ever heard the name. Then he looked at me properly. I watched it land. I watched my brother's face come apart and put itself back together again around my name. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise, half up off the ground, and it all fell out of him in a rush. That he was sorry, that he'd never once protected me, that he'd cut ties with our father, that I was coming home with him. 3 years, and someone had come looking after all. I had never once let myself imagine it. That was the part that reached me in the end. Not that he was here, that I'd stopped expecting anyone ever would be. I got him inside, out of the ruined armor and into dry clothes, and put a bowl of Gablina's onion soup in his hands. He ate like he hadn't in days, which he probably hadn't. Then he told me what I'd left behind. The whole family had come apart. Our father had leaned on the idea that I must always place first. A man who'd never once cracked the top 40 himself, demanding first place from his sons. And the only reason I'd never delivered it was a freak prodigy sharing my class, the prince who broke my hand. After they threw me away, the rest of it fell in on its own. Father was pushed out of his own house for exactly the thing he was. Mother took Lily and went back to her family. Victor, cold and precise as ever, took the seat as head. and Marcus had walked away from all of it. Top of the night school, a real career in front of him, and he'd traded it for a probationary posting on the Red March border, the frontier order that sits right at the edge of the Great Wood, for no reason on this earth except that it put him close enough to come looking for me. "Didn't I come all this way to find you?" he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then, quieter. "Come home, live under my roof." I looked at my brother, who had thrown his whole life at a forest to find a person everyone else had agreed to forget, and I felt the guilt of it settle in my chest. Not his guilt, mine. I'd carried everything alone so long it had never once occurred to me that carrying it alone was a choice, or that the choice had hurt the one person who would have helped. I started to tell him why I couldn't leave, why this place, these strange loud creatures, this life, why it was mine in a way nothing before it had ever been. I didn't get to finish. The door banged open and Corinne stood in it, calm as a struck bell. The second uninvited guest of the day had arrived, she reported. A vampire, this time. He was floating. That was the first thing. A pale noble in dark finery, hanging a body's height off my lawn, with the full moon set behind him, like he'd arranged it. He named himself Lord Vane of the Vampire Clan, and he made very sure I understood the word noble before he got anywhere near his point. His point was the golem. There had been a golem on this hill for 2,000 years, and now there wasn't, and he wanted to know where it had gone. When I didn't answer fast enough, he called my beastkin lowly and promised to crush all of them. And then, because I still hadn't spoken, he decided a mere human male addressing him was itself an insult worth killing over, and threw a rain of hardening blood spears at me to make his opinion clear. I put the stormward blade between us. It doesn't only cut, it cuts the evil out of a thing, and the spears came apart on it like glass on stone. Behind me, Marcus was already trying to stand, still gray from the forest, insisting that an elder brother's whole job was to shield the younger, and that this time he would do it, no regrets. I told him to sit down. I meant it kindly. He'd stumbled into a fight he had no measure of, and I'd stopped needing to be shielded a very long way back. I told Corinne to handle it. She'd asked me once what a golem even was, and I answered my brother's stare with the truth as she moved, that the golem this vampire was hunting had been standing in front of him all evening in a maid's uniform. Then Corinne summoned her titan shell, and the small silver girl vanished inside a pristine steel giant taller than the trees, and she opened on Lord Vane with the rubido blast, a red flare that swallowed him whole and left nothing but ash drifting down through the moonlight. The ash pulled itself back together. Vane rose out of his own remains on a thread of moonlight, whole again, laughing, informing us that the night belonged to his kind and that nothing under the moon could end him. Marcus stared. Vampires drink the moon. It heals them, and it makes them proud about it. I told him what any schoolboy who studies monsters knows. The moon that healed him would kill him in sunlight, and until sunrise, water would do the job just as well. Moonlight glances off running water and loses its holiness, and a vampire standing in a flood is only a proud dead thing getting wet. Slappy heard the word water and gave me a great deal of it. A wall of it came up out of nothing and knocked the vampire off his feet, and Goblina came in low across his back and drove him down under the surface before he could climb the light again. The blow landed. He went down. That was all anyone needed to see of it. He tore himself into a beast shape then, some wolf and bat ruin of a body, shrieking that his renewal was failing, and it was, though not from the water. Corinne's voice came flat out of the steel giant. The rubido blast carried an old alchemy, a true law that unmakes an evil right, and it had canceled the moon pact holding him together the instant her red light first touched him. The transformation only spent what little he had left, and faster. His death had been sealed a full minute ago. He simply hadn't noticed yet. By the end, he wasn't threatening anyone. He was begging the moon to answer him, and the moon wouldn't, and he was coming apart while he prayed. I summoned the gauntlet onto my right hand, and through the bond, I called up the Skycleaver, a holy blade, the kind the border knights only ever hand to squad captains, and weaker ones than this. There was nothing left to win. There was only a thing suffering because it had chosen the wrong hill. The one mercy I had for him was to make it quick. I set my feet, brought the blade down in a single clean line, and it was done. What was left of Lord Vane crumbled to dust and blew off across the water. He'd earned very little from me by insulting me. He earned this by throwing spears at my friends. Marcus was quiet for a long time. He'd just watched a vampire, the kind of thing that costs a full night squad half its men, get put down on a nowhere hill by a slime, a goblin, a 2,000-year-old machine, and his little brother swinging a sword in a hand everyone back home believed was ruined for good. He kept looking at that hand. Then he told me I was splendid. He said it plainly, no envy in it, only a little of the ache of a man realizing his youngest brother had outrun the lot of them. I gave him the truth I hadn't finished at the fire. I couldn't go back to the city. I wanted to stay out here and take bond summoning as far as it would go, and the Great Wood was the only place wide enough to do it. I introduced him properly to the household while I said it. Corinne, Gablina, Slappy, Vera, Tara, the strangest family a disowned third son ever put together. He was silent again. Then he accepted it. If staying out of my way was the best help he had to give, he said, then that was what he'd give me. I offered to have Corinne fly him home. Corinne refused before he could even answer, flatly, on the grounds that she had no cargo room and that it was unthinkable for anyone but me to lay a hand on her. She suggested instead that she summon a long-range missile to send him back on. I declined the missile. We put him on one of Vera's wolves in the end, a good steady one that knew the way and could make the city in under a day. He gripped my shoulder once at the tree line, the right one, and rode off down into the dark. The house still had the prince somewhere inside it, the dead of my hand, uncollected and patient. Some greater kind of thing had noticed my hill tonight, and worse than a lone vampire would come of it. But my brother had found me, the moon was going down clean, and for tonight, the people in that log house were mine, and they were safe. I went back inside to see about the omelet I'd never gotten to eat. A wolf came up the hill at a dead run with my brother on its back, and I knew before he was out of the saddle that the news was bad. Marcus had been coming most of his days off since the reunion. He'd tamed one of Vera's wolves for the trip, and he never showed up empty-handed. A pillowcase for Corinne once, a jar of sugar for Gablina that she guarded like a war chest. He'd bought his way into the household one small gift at a time, and nobody minded. Today, he had no gifts. He had a name. Roland's coming, he said, here, to the Great Wood, with 800 soldiers behind him. I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked him to start from the beginning. He told it the way he'd heard it at the border. The king had a daughter, the third princess, Grace, sick since birth, coughing her way through every change of season, and the king wanted her well. There was a cure, supposedly, hidden in this forest, so he'd called in the best blade in the kingdom to fetch it. That was Victor, my oldest brother, the new head of House Ashford, since our father fell. Victor turned him down, Marcus said, and there was something almost like a laugh under it. Told the king to his face that hunting for treasure is an adventurer's job, not a knight's. He walked out of a royal audience. He shook his head. Same Victor. So the king had hesitated, and into that hesitation, the fourth prince had stepped and volunteered. Family duty, Roland called it. His dear sick sister. And you don't believe him, I said. I ran into his people while I was looking for you, Marcus said. He crouched, put his back against a stump, kept his voice level. They offered me cooperation, very friendly. All they wanted was help finding a certain missing student from the Knight Academy. He looked at me. The medicine's the excuse, Ethan. You're the errand. I flexed my right hand, the one that worked now, the one that hadn't for 3 years. Roland had taken the use of it in an academy final, in front of the whole school, and everyone had agreed that settled the matter of what I was. I didn't feel afraid, exactly. I felt like a man who's just found out the weather. Then we don't let him find a reason to stay, I said. We get his medicine first. We hand it over. He turns around and goes home. The cure had a name too, and it was an ugly one. Fairy powder, ground from the wings of fairies. Small winged things the size of a palm. The wings torn off them while they lived, because that was the only way anyone knew to get it. I sat with that for about as long as I could stand it, which wasn't long. No, I said, we're not doing it that way. Marcus didn't argue. Corinne, folding a cloth by the hearth, tilted her head at me the way she does when she's already 3 steps ahead. I was moved by your kindness just now, master, she said, precise as a clock. So allow me to point out that you have a way to reach the goal without doing anything cruel at all. She set the cloth down. If a fairy will bond with you, you can summon the medicine straight through the bond. No wings, no harm. I stared at her. That's it. Corinne, you're sharp. From the corner, Gablina straightened up fast. I sensed some ill intent just now, she announced. Green arms crossed, glaring at nobody in particular, because I'd been about to say something about creatures I'd bonded before, and she'd decided in advance to be insulted. I didn't say anything, I told her. You were going to. She wasn't wrong, so I let it go. The plan was simple to say and hard to do. Find a fairy. Fairies, Marcus reminded us, are very small, very good at hiding, and enjoy nothing so much as making trouble for anyone who comes looking. I'd been in this forest for months and never seen one. The clock was already running. Red March was a day's ride from the tree line, and the prince was nearly at Red March. Vera put her whole pack on it. If anything in the forest could nose out a hidden fairy, she said, it was a hell wolf, and she promised the pack a treat if they brought one back. They came back with nothing. 20 wolves, the best noses in the Great Wood, and not one of them had caught a scent. A fairy can hide its smell and its sound down to nothing. Vera stood there with her ears flat, so ashamed I thought she might sink into the dirt. I gave the pack their treats anyway. It wasn't their fault the quarry cheated. And then, while Vera was still apologizing, Tara strolled out of the ferns with a fairy caught in her mouth. She spat it into the dirt and pinned it flat with one lazy paw of a hand. "Is this the thing you wanted?" she asked, purring, delighted with herself. "You're mistaken if you think dogs are the only hunters on this hill," the fairy shrieked. It was exactly what the lore promised, palm-sized insect wings, a small furious voice. And right now, that voice was begging. It confessed to everything. The sheep it had sent wandering, the filth it had once slipped into somebody's soup. It would apologize for all of it, it swore, if the cat would just not eat it. Then it told me something that made the whole royal expedition look ridiculous. "The wings don't cure anything," it gasped. "It's the scales. You breathe them, and you see things that aren't there. That's all it ever was." People felt strange, decided they felt better, and started tearing our wings off over a lie. It squirmed under Tara's paw. "Look, take a wing if you have to. They grow back. Just call off the cat." 800 soldiers, a prince, all marching on a mistake. I crouched down to its level. "I've got a better idea than a wing," I said. "How do you feel about a contract?" It looked at Tara's grin, then at me, and decided very quickly that it liked me best. The bond took, and the moment it did, the little thing burst into the air over my palm, thrilled clear through. "You're giving me a name?" It spun in a circle. "Yes, I want it. I want it. We don't get our own names, you know? We're all just fairies, all the same one, all sharing the one mind." It hovered close to my nose. "Give me a good one." That last part stuck with me, all sharing the one mind. One fairy, it turned out, is never really only one fairy. Whatever this one saw, the others could know. I filed that away without understanding yet how much it would matter. "Pixie," I said. She loved it. She said it about 9 times, tasting it. Then I opened the bond and looked at what I could summon through her, and the answer was white powder. All kinds of white powder. Corinne went stiff. "Master, do not summon that," she warned. "The scales are a hallucinogen. This may be the same poison in another shape." Pixie had already started. She thought summoning was the best game she'd ever played, and she flung the stuff everywhere, laughing, filling the clearing with a fine white cloud. Corinne caught some on a fingertip and tasted it, braced for the worst. "It's flour," she said, disgusted. "It's ordinary flour. Why is it so misleading?" There was more where that came from. Sugar, salt, seasoning, breadcrumbs, baking soda, powdered cream, and one the console called Dragon Core powder, which turned out to be the medicine we'd been hunting all along. But before any of that mattered, Pixie kept throwing flour. The whole clearing hung thick with it, and Tara wandered over with an itch. "Murrow, I really feel like sharpening my claws," she said, and set them to the nearest tree. The sparks met the flower cloud. I've been in real fights that scared me less. The air itself caught and slammed outward in a single hot thump, a dust explosion. Corinne would explain afterward. Flour hanging thick enough will do that with one spark. Nobody was hurt. Slappy had already thrown up a fine spray of water across the whole cloud on pure instinct, and the mist ate most of the blast before it could grow teeth. Marcus lost the tips of his hair. That was the worst of it. Corinne stood in the settling white with her uniform gone pale, and made a new household law on the spot. "Scattering flour," she said, "is forbidden forever." Pixie said okay in a tone that meant no. So we had the medicine, real medicine, the Dragon Core powder, enough to send a prince home happy. What we didn't have was a way to hand it over that didn't put me in a room with Roland. Marcus solved that himself, which was the part I hated. "I'll take it," he said, like it was already decided. "Among all of us, I'm the only one who can get a direct audience with the prince." He turned the little pouch over in his hands. "Roland's a dangerous man, Ethan. I'd rather walk into that room 100 times than have you anywhere near it." I told him I was sorry to shove something so ugly onto him. He waved it off. An older brother's duty, he called it, and said he'd decided a long time ago never to neglect it again. Pixie announced she was going too. "I made the stuff you're delivering," she said, planting herself on Marcus's shoulder like she owned it. "So I'm coming to see what happens." Obviously, I nearly told her no. Then I remembered what she'd said about the one mind, that whatever she saw, the rest of them could know, and I had one of the rest of them buzzing around my own hill. Sending Pixie to Red March wasn't just sending a witness, it was leaving an ear in the room, so I let her go. And that is how I came to watch a thing happen a day's ride away, in a town I never set foot in, as clearly as if I'd stood in the dust myself. I wasn't there, but a fairy is never only one fairy, and Pixie was, so I heard it the way she heard it, sharp and close and secondhand at once. Roland reached Red March a full day early and wanted to march straight into the forest. His soldiers had just finished a long road and expected a night's rest. He told them an army under his command wasted no time and no steps, and that anyone who complained could stay behind for good. That shut them up. Then an old general stepped out of the ranks. White hair, white beard, the kind of man who's watched too many princes to be frightened of one. He hadn't come to complain. He'd come to report. The local knights had already secured the elixir. The mission, he said, was finished before it started. I could have told you the exact moment Roland's real errand died, because Pixie felt the room change. The prince had never cared about the forest. He'd come to comb it for a certain missing academy student, and now there was no reason left to comb anything. The knight who handed him the medicine was my brother. Roland knew Marcus, a senior from the Golden class, a face from the old days. He tried to salvage the trip. Military exercises, he suggested, as long as they were out here. The old general cut that off flat. The king's order was to fetch the medicine and return at once, and having done the one, His Highness would do the other. There was no arguing with it without looking like a man inventing reasons to linger, so Roland gave up the ground, but he didn't give up graciously. He looked at the pouch of white powder, and, in that cool, careful way of his, wondered aloud whether a bag of flour was really a cure at all, whether this whole clean little handover wasn't a trick to move him along. Marcus had been waiting for exactly that. I thought you might say that, he said, so I brought something. Pixie made her entrance the only way Pixie knows how, straight up off Marcus's shoulder into the sunlight, in front of a prince and his whole retinue, and no one there had ever seen a fairy in their lives. "Hey, thanks for waiting," she chirped. "I'm the fairy Pixie, not the type. The name, amazing, right? Nice to Pixie you." The yard went silent the way a yard does when 800 people stop believing their eyes at once. A fairy, real, in the open air. Roland himself admitted it was his first. Marcus explained the truth of it while they gaped, that the wings were worthless, that the misconception came from the scales, and that Pixie could simply make the medicine, no cruelty required. The prince accepted it. He declared the mission accomplished and ordered the withdrawal. Then, mild as anything, he probed. He thanked Marcus, and he asked almost kindly whether Marcus had found what he'd come to the border looking for. Marcus said he couldn't answer that. Public matters and private ones, he said, were different things. Roland didn't like that. He told my brother, in that even unhurried voice, that a man like Marcus was never a private person, that he was always the kingdom's, and that standing in the prince's way was the same as standing in the country's way. It was a threat wearing the clothes of a lecture, and the whole yard felt it land, which is when Pixie decided she'd heard enough. "Ugh, what a stuck-up guy," she said, loud, hovering right in his face. "Are you one of those coattail riders? You know, living off the family name? You boss everybody around like you're something, and you're not even that great." Nobody breathed. Roland asked his attendants coldly whether that was what people thought of him. They rushed to deny it. "Of course not, Your Highness. Never." A wall of no. And one of them, somewhere in the back, forgot himself and said, "I think so." You could have heard it in the next town. The wall of no cracked right down the middle, and every man in it suddenly found something fascinating to look at in the dirt. I have never in my life wanted to hug a hallucinogenic bug so badly. Roland stood in the middle of it with his humiliation on full display, and did the one thing worse than shouting. He swallowed it. He went calm. And then, smiling, he announced that to guarantee a steady supply of this miraculous medicine, he would be taking the fairy back to the capital with him. And the knight who understood her, of course. Marcus would come too. There it was. He'd walked into the forest to pocket me, and he was walking out with my brother instead. Marcus went still for a long moment. He knew exactly what he was, a hostage with a nicer name. But if the prince's eyes were on him, they weren't hunting the Great Wood. They weren't hunting me, so he agreed. He looked for just a heartbeat in a direction that had nothing at the end of it but a day's ride of trees and me. And then he bowed his head and said yes. I came back to myself on my own hill, with the light going red and a fairy still humming somewhere at the edge of the clearing, and I knew all of it. The insult, the crack in the ranks, the smile the prince put on to hide the wound, and the price. My brother had come to shield me, and he'd done it by letting the man who crushed my hand fold him into a saddle and carry him to the capital. The plan had worked exactly. No confrontation, no Ethan. Roland turned around and went home. He'd just taken 2 of mine with him when he went. Corinne came and stood at my shoulder in the dying light. She didn't tell me it would be fine. She's never once lied to me. What she said was that we would hear everything, that as long as one small mouthy piece of that shared fairy mind was inside the capital, The walls of the palace might as well be glass. That was true, and it was almost a comfort. 3 years ago, Roland took my hand and decided that made me nothing. Now he'd taken my brother, and I understood something I'd been slow to see. He didn't want to beat me anymore. He wanted to own me. A crushed hand hadn't been the end of his interest in me. It had been the beginning. The debt between us was heavier tonight than it had ever been, and I hadn't collected a single coin of it. I stood on my hill and let the forest go dark and did the sum. My brother in a gilded cage, a prince who wouldn't stop. And somewhere past all of it, out in the deep of the great wood, a far bigger thing had already noticed my little kingdom on the hill, and it was getting ready to come and say hello. It arrived the way the forest had promised it would, and knowing didn't make it one bit better. The sky over my hill went dark in the middle of a clear afternoon, not clouds. The light itself folded and churned, wrong at the edges, and the ground under the log house let out a long, low roar, like the whole hill was answering something bigger than itself. Then he was up there, a tall figure in dark finery and a snapping cape, chains at the shoulder, hanging in empty air the way a man stands on a solid floor. I'd been braced for the far bigger thing since the night Marcus rode off. I still wasn't ready for it to fly. Corinne didn't wait for the order. She dropped into her golem shell between one breath and the next, the great gray plates folding shut around her, and put a bolt of red light through the space where the figure had been. He wasn't there anymore. He drifted a body's width to the left, unhurried, and the blast tore off into the sky and died. "Master, stand back." Her voice came out of the golem flat and hard. Slappy tried next. A wall of water climbed off the hillside, beautiful and enormous, and fell short by the height of a house, because you cannot drown a thing that simply goes higher. Vera and Tara did what animals do at what they cannot reach. Vera bayed at the sky. Tara screamed straight up at it. Neither of them accomplished one single thing. Gablina hopped foot to foot with her crescent blade out, furious. "Come down here and fight like a person. Flying's cheating." He did not come down to fight like a person. We could not touch him. That was the plain truth of it, and it settled in my gut like cold water. Every companion I'd bled to gather, every trick I'd dragged out of another world, and he floated above all of it, picking his moment. The golem's plating started to whine, a rising note under Corinne's feet. "Overload's coming," she said. "1 more minute, then I'm a statue." I opened my mouth to call the retreat. Leave the hill, the log house, the memories, all of it, because a place is only a place, and I wasn't trading a single life for one. And then the Demon King asked us to stop. Not roared, asked. A big, courteous voice rolling down out of the churn, saying he hadn't come to fight, that he only wanted to talk. I told everyone to hold. Slappy's water hung a moment, then fell. The hill went quiet. He came down slow, folded that impossible flight away, and up close, he was almost worse, because he bowed. A thing the stories say you run from on sight, the pinnacle of every demon and vampire that crawls. And he inclined his head to a man with a stiff right hand standing in front of a cabin. He named himself Blackroar, Demon King, said the way you'd hand over a card. Then he apologized for the vampire. He'd sent Lord Vane to watch us, he explained, not to strike. And Vane had gone past his orders and thrown himself at the golem for his own glory. To Blackroar, that was near unforgivable, because Vane had nearly wrecked the one thing worth all of this. And so, he had forbidden the vampire's return for good. He asked me to aim whatever hate I'd earned at that one dead man, and not at his whole people. Corinne's shell had gone dark behind me, cooked clean through. She climbed out of the open chest in her plain black and white silver hair damp, and Slappy wobbled over and poured water down her back until she quit steaming. She glared at the Demon King the entire time and did not drop her guard by a hair. Then, Blackroar told us why he'd really come, and the hill got very small. There was a war, he said, not a border squabble, a war older than the kingdom, older than the academy, 3 sides grinding on each other since before anyone now breathing was born. Demons, gods, dragons. And the one thing that could tip it, the thing all 3 would burn the world to hold, was what an ancient civilization had left behind when it died before any of them. Relics with the power to cancel a god, unmake a dragon, and a demon. Whoever woke those relics won everything. He had been hunting the Great Wood for years for a way in, and the way in, it turned out, was me. Then he knelt, all the way down, forehead toward the dirt of my hill, and begged me to teach him the magic that stirred those relics, bond summoning, for the sake of his whole race. I stood there and did not think about the war. I thought about a tavern, 3 years back, a wandering bard with a little harp across his knee, 2 kind by half, teaching a crippled nobody a small trick for the price of nothing at all. If the thing living in my hands was a key 3 god races would slaughter each other to hold, then who walks into a roadside tavern and gives that key away for free? To me, of all the people in the world, and why? For the first time, the memory of that pleasant, patient man did not feel like a gift. It felt like a hand laid quiet on the back of my neck. "Raise your head," I told the Demon King. My voice came out steadier than the rest of me. "Kneeling won't teach you a thing." I tried to teach him. I couldn't have kept it from him at that point if I'd wanted to. I walked him through the shape of it, the reach into the cold, empty place, and the pull, and nothing came. He tried for the better part of an hour and pulled nothing but air. It wasn't him, it was the magic. Whatever bond summoning hooks into to work, it needs something only a human soul carries. Blackroar could study it for 1,000 years and never turn it. He took the blow standing, then asked, very carefully, for the next best thing, a bond, between him and me, so that whatever I could pull through his side of it, he could sit and watch me do. I'd bonded a slime, a goblin, an automaton, 2 apex predators, and a fairy. I looked at the Demon King out of every story I'd been raised on, thought why not, and held out my working right hand. The bond took like all the others, a small click somewhere behind the ribs. And the second it closed, I felt the size of what sat on the far end of it. I reached, out of plain habit, to see what he'd give me. The world tore open over my hill. A building came up out of nothing. Not a house. A tower of glass and steel out of the world I used to belong to. Floor stacked on floor stacked on floor. Climbing past the treetops, past the crown of the hill, past the height of the royal castle, and still going, throwing a shadow across the whole clearing, like a second nightfall dropped early. Sunlight ran up 1,000 windows at once. Near the top, a rag of cloud snagged on a corner and tore. The forest went dead silent beneath it. Every companion I had stood with a craned neck and an open mouth. Even Corinne forgot to be angry. It was, I will admit, the single most impressive thing I have ever done, and I have restored a dead hand and unmade a vampire under a full moon. I looked up at it for a long moment. Then I let it go, and it vanished the way it had come, and the ordinary afternoon fell back down over the clearing like a held breath finally let out. Goblina found her voice first. "You're just putting it back? It blocks the sun," I said, and I'd never once find the kitchen. I liked the log house. I'd cut the logs myself. The Demon King left soon after, quietly and all at once, the way big things leave. Let the towers stay in the other world. For a while after that, the biggest event on the hill was bread. Corinne decided we would have it. That meant a kiln, which meant Goblina firing bricks and grumbling about being ordered around, and Slappy hauling water and cement, and several days of everyone circling the drying clay like it might get up and run. When it was finally set, we pulled flour through the fairy bond, clean white powder straight out of the air, and Corinne worked in salt and water and a yeast she'd cultured off wild mountain grapes, and we baked. It came out golden and soft and better than anything I'd put in my mouth across 3 years of hard road rations. Vera and Tara nearly came to blows over the last of it. I was reaching for my own piece when a fairy I had not summoned zipped past my ear, snatched it clean, and ate the whole thing in midair. Not Pixie. Pixie was in the capital, but also Pixie, because they are all one, all sharing the single soul. And the little thief, now licking crumbs off her fingers over my table, carried every memory the one in the palace carried, which was the whole point. That was how the news reached me. She wiped her mouth and told me, between loud complaints about the smallness of her stomach, that my brother was well, better than well. Then she told me the rest, and the bread went to ash in my mouth. I got it the way I got everything now, through the fairy, the way she'd seen it, secondhand, and a little sticky with melon. There was a princess in that palace. The third one, Grace, shut away for years. Behind a cough no medicine in the kingdom could touch. Sea herbs, bear liver, and alchemist's water, none of it. Her own half-brother, the prince, had told her to her face that she was a burden, that keeping her alive was a waste, that she ought to just die. So she had stopped letting anyone through her door. Marcus walked in anyway. He wasn't meant to. He'd been stripped of his duties and penned inside the castle walls for the crime of getting in Roland's way. But he heard her through the door, refusing to see him, and decided a shut door wasn't a no. He told her something I'd have known was true from his voice alone, even without the fairy carrying it, that he had once had a younger brother everyone called useless, that he'd meant to protect him, and by the time he found him, the boy had gone and gotten strong without any help at all. He said the years he'd set aside for that brother were going spare now. He asked if she'd take them. Then he opened his hand and Pixie tumbled out into the light and cheerfully offered to fix her cough, and the white powder that fell off her wings did what nothing in the kingdom had managed. It eased it. The princess asked his name. He gave it. She made him her personal knight on the spot. So my brother was a prisoner in a gilded room with a sick girl and a fairy for company, and he'd spent the first free hour of it being kind to a stranger. That was Marcus all over. It did not make me feel better. It told me exactly how tight the box around him had drawn. I flew to town. Corinne built an eagle out of nothing and we crossed the forest in an afternoon. And I told myself I was going for word on Marcus, which was half true. The other half was a paper I'd filed a while back, a promotion I'd been told was a formality. Walter met me at the counter, all relief and worry the way he always is. The prince had gone, he said, back to the capital with every classmate he'd dragged out here, Marcus among them, and that particular door was shut. Then Corinne, who has no patience for weather talk, asked him flat out about my A rank. Walter stopped polishing the mug in his hand. He set it down. He said the promotion had been rejected, not by the guild. He was careful about that. It had come from higher up, nobles leaning on the guild from the outside, and if you followed the leaning back to where it started, you arrived, of all places, at the Royal Knight Academy. Corinne went very still, which is far worse than her shouting. She asked, in a voice like a closing door, for permission to summon her armor and remove the school from the map. I told her no. She asked again. I told her no again. I didn't need the whole story to see the shape of it. The school that had expelled me could not afford for me to succeed. If the dropout they'd thrown out turned up an A-rank adventurer, then everyone would know the throwing out had been the mistake, not the boy. So they had spent favors, a noble's child admitted here, a grade nudged there, to make sure the mistake never got the chance to prove itself. Cheaper to hold my head under than to stand up and say they'd been wrong. And then there was the finish on it, the part that turned my stomach worse than the rest. Walter had heard they were preparing, very graciously, to let me come back, to re-enroll, on the one condition that I ask for it, that I come to the gate and beg, so the whole ugly thing could be dressed up as mercy and the school could keep its face. I almost laughed. 3 years ago, they took the future of my sword hand and my family name and told me I was nothing. And now the plan was to hand it all back. If only I'd kneel in the road and thank them for the privilege. I don't kneel in roads. I just watched a demon king do it and felt nothing but tired. Then we do it the other way, Walter said, and there was an old fire climbing up in him. If they'd freeze the rank the quiet way, we would earn it the loud way, a feat too big to lobby out of existence. Corinne bit down on that hard. Not A rank. S dragon slayers and island finders got S, she said, and nobody alive could sign a paper to make an S rank vanish. Walter, half joking, said the surest proof of the lot would be a base held deep in the Greatwood, where no human had ever kept ground. And that, of course, was impossible. So, I already have one, I said. I have rarely enjoyed the look on a man's face more. Back on the hill, I laid out the plan. I'd build an outpost, a real one, deep in the unexplored dark of the Greatwood, where the guild's maps just go white, a place adventurers could rest and resupply on the way in. Do that, prove it, and the S rank couldn't be argued with by anyone. Gablina squinted at me. Coming from the man who'd moved to a monster forest on purpose to get away from people, she said, inviting strangers in was a strange sort of plan. She wasn't wrong. So I gave her the truth instead of a joke. I was doing it for Marcus. He'd thrown away his own career to come looking for me, and he was sitting in a gilded cage in the capital right now because being my brother made him useful to a prince. I was tired of being the reason he had less. If I stood on my own as the highest adventurer the kingdom had, and equal to anyone at that court, then being tied to me would stop being a weakness he had to carry. It would become a wall he could stand behind. Corinne, of course, wanted to summon the base. Why swing an axe, she said, when the Demon King's bond could pull a whole Finnish city out of the air? She had a point, and I let the reach open a crack, just to see. For half a heartbeat, it was there on the far side of the bond. Not a building this time, a city. My city, the one I'd grown up under. Towers past counting, a wide river, bridges, the entire cliff face of glass I used to call New York, waiting to be set down whole onto a forest that had never seen a straight line. I could have dropped it right there. I could have handed a sleeping god's worth of another world to anyone who came walking up my road. I closed the reach and left the city where it was. We would build it by hand. Logs I cut, walls Gablina raised, water from Slappy, a roof low enough to let the afternoon in. Corinne sulked and swore she was not done trying to make me look impressive. That was fine. I didn't want to look impressive. I wanted a rank they couldn't steal, a brother they couldn't use, and a quiet hill at the end of all of it. But that night, with the plans half drawn under the lamp, I kept sliding back to the bard. A war of gods and dragons and demons over relics that could unmake any of them. A key only a human soul could turn. And 3 years ago, a smiling man in a tavern had pressed that exact key into the hand of a broken boy who mattered to no one on earth, asked for nothing in return, and walked off whistling into the dark. I was only now starting to wonder what he had really been. And somewhere out past the edge of everything I could see, I had the cold certainty certain feeling that he already knew precisely where to find me. Walter had his arms locked around a hellwolf's neck, like the animal owed him money, and he screamed for the first full mile. I rode beside him and let him scream. The last time this man had really looked at me, I'd been a soft-handed academy boy who couldn't hold a training sword in his right hand, and he'd taken me out on my first quests anyway. He'd scolded me, fed me, signed my early papers. Now, he was howling through a monster forest on the back of a beast that could take a knight's arm off at the shoulder, and the beast was wagging its tail. When the wolves finally slowed and Walter climbed down on legs that didn't quite hold him, he saw the road. It ran on ahead of us, flat gray stone laid straight through the trees. The kind of thing you'd find under a city, not 3 days deep into the worst dungeon in the kingdom. He crouched and put his hand flat on it, like he needed to feel it to trust it. "You paved it," he said. "Inside the Great Wood. You paved a road inside the Great Wood." Gablina and Corinne had laid most of it, one with a chainsaw and a temper, the other with a golem's arms. I told him that. I did not tell him the part he was really asking, which was how a boy the whole capital had agreed was finished had built anything at all. He remembered guiding me on my first job, a rat cellar under a bakery, and me being scared of the rats. He said it twice, the way old men do when a thing is too big to say once. Then he wiped his face with the back of his wrist and pretended it was sweat. The academy had blocked my promotion. They'd rather I crawl back to their gate and beg to be readmitted than admit that throwing me out had been a mistake. I could have crawled. Begging is cheap and I had the knees for it. Instead, I'd built a road through a death forest and I was going to make them look at it. "Come on," I told him. "The road's not the part I wanted to show you." The wall came up out of the trees first, pale stone, taller than a man on a wolf, as thick and fire-hard as anything ringing the royal capital. Then the gate, and then the thing that actually broke him. Walter had come expecting a cabin, one log house, a fire pit, maybe a fence. What he got was a dozen log houses in neat rows down the slope, smoke rising off half their chimneys, a whole small town breathing inside a wall in the middle of nowhere. "That's not a base," he said faintly. "That's a village." He was a guild man to the bone, though, so even drowning in it, he went looking for the flaw. "No water," he said. "A base this far out with no water source is a corpse waiting to happen. Where's your water?" I called Slappy. The slime came bouncing down the slope, took one look at the stranger, and hosed Walter head to foot with a jet of clean cold water before I could tell it not to. Walter stood there dripping and blinking. I told him that was his water source, unlimited, changed daily, and that I was sorry, and that I was not going to punish the slime because the slime was very proud of itself. Gablina brought bread still hot from the kiln and strips of dried meat, and Corinne set it in his hands and told him flatly to eat every bite with gratitude. He bit the bread. He bit the meat. He said "delicious" with his mouth full and his eyes wet. And then he asked what the meat was, and I told him it was giant centipede, and he decided he didn't care. I walked him through the rest of it because he wanted to be thorough, and because I wanted him to see. Baths, one for men and one for women. Water swapped fresh every morning. A sharpening bench where Tara ran a blade along an ancient wheel and hummed to it like it was alive. Vera at the front counter, taking the small fee that let a traveler stay. And the attraction, a different one summoned every day for the guests. A water slide, a cat cafe full of enormous calm tigers, a garish little pleasure ground with a spinning ride that I was frankly embarrassed by. Walter stopped in the middle of it and went quiet. He said he'd trained a lot of boys. He said most of them stayed exactly the size they started. He said he was not supposed to play favorites, that he'd promised himself he'd judge this place cold, like it belonged to a stranger. And then his voice cracked right down the middle and he gave up on cold. An S-rank feat. He dragged the heel of his hand across his eyes and didn't care who saw it. "Nobody's ever held ground in here. Nobody. I'll report it to Central myself. I'll put my own name on it." I'd made a road, a wall, a town, and a mentor cry. And none of it was the thing that finally got me the rank. What got me the rank walked through the gate a few weeks later, sneering. By then the base was full. Word had crossed the frontier. A rest stop deep in the unexplorable Greatwood, carried to by tame monsters. Water-free, a marvel a day. Even a noble-born A-rank researcher came out to scoff at it and ended up riding the spinning ride twice, glaring at me like I'd cheated her by being real. And then came the one who wasn't there for the bread. His name was Sander, and he wore his A-rank the way a small man wears a big coat. He'd started at the front counter, sneering at Vera, because we made every guest sleep in shared quarters, Rank be damned. Out here, strength is the only currency and a bot rank buys you nothing. That was the rule of the frontier, and it offended him to the bone. By the time a wolf ran up the hill to fetch me, he'd stopped shouting about rooms and started shouting about people. I came down with Corinne at my shoulder. I asked plainly whether one of mine had been rude to him. He looked me up and down, the scrawny man, the stiff right hand, and laughed. He announced that he was in charge now, that the strong ruled here, and he was the strongest thing on this hill, and therefore his word was law. He wanted the best house cleared. He wanted the nobodies kept away from him. And then, warming to it, he wanted Vera. And when Corinne stepped forward, he decided he'd take her too. Said she was wasted on a man like me. Said women were happier kept by an A rank anyway. Corinne's eyes went red. I have seen that red exactly twice, and both times something was about to stop existing. She asked me, very softly, to let her give him a truly agonizing death. She pointed out, reasonably, that leaving a fool like this alive only ever brought harm. Stop, Corinne, I said. Don't lay a hand on him. She stopped. She did not like it. She stopped anyway. Then I hit him once, in the soft place under the ribs, with the hand that still worked. He folded around my fist and went down onto his knees in the dirt, gasping like a landed fish, and I crouched to be sure he could hear me. I told him the rule he loved so much cut both ways, that out here you followed the strong, and if he ever again put a hand toward one of my people, the strong would return the favor without a shred of mercy. I told him that by his own law, if I told him to die, he'd have to. He knelt there in the torchlight, and for the first time all evening, he had nothing to say. I thought that was the end of it. It was actually the beginning of the best day of my life. Xander came back the next morning with his courage refilled and his story rehearsed. He'd been humiliated, so now he was dangerous. That's how small men work. He drew a magic sword, a real one, he swore, hauled out of a deep dungeon near his home guild, proof of the rank I'd insulted. He held it up so the crowd could admire it and told them I'd assaulted an innocent A rank and that he'd be taking my arms and legs for the insult. I summoned the cleaver into my offhand and broke his blade in one stroke. It came apart like cheap glass, bright shards ringing off the stone, and Saunders stared at the stub of a hilt in his fist. I told him a real A rank doesn't crumple from a tap under the ribs and doesn't carry a sword that shatters, and hadn't even noticed he'd walked across a line he couldn't walk back from. He started to beg. I told him the fight wasn't over just because he was unarmed. That was when two men stepped out of the ring of watchers, and one of them was Walter. The other was older, straight-backed, dressed like the capital. Sander, drowning, tried to rally the crowd behind him, and the old man cut across him and said, in a voice used to being obeyed, that he was a first-class director of the Central Guild, and that he had watched every arrogant, lawless minute of this, and that he personally held the authority to strip a man of his A rank. He named it done on the spot. Sander lost the last of his mind and lunged at him. I stepped in and put him down. A fast run of strikes to the nerves, more than 100 of them in the space of a breath, and he dropped without a mark on him and did not get up. Gordon, the old guild clerk who'd scouted me years ago, ambled out and started tying his wrists like a man bagging groceries. Then Director Leland turned to me and apologized. They'd baited Sander here, he admitted. His guild had been selling ranks for bribes, and the surest way to prove it was to send the man somewhere he'd expose himself, and to have a failsafe standing by strong enough that no one got hurt while he did. I had been the failsafe. Gordon had vouched for me. Walter had tested me, quietly, that whole first day of the road and the bread, and never let it show. I opened my mouth to be annoyed about that. Leland spoke first. He said the base I'd built, a bridgehead into ground the guild had written off as impossible for 100 years, was a feat the council had already reviewed. He said the Knight Academy had been leaning on nobles to keep me down, and that the guild answered to no crown and no school. Then he straightened, and his voice carried out across the whole silent yard. He declared the adventurer Ethan raised to S rank, effective now. For a moment, I honestly couldn't hear it. 3 years ago, a prince had crushed my sword hand in front of the entire academy, and every single person in that arena had agreed, quietly, that it made me nothing. My own father had agreed. My teacher had agreed. I had spent 3 years agreeing, and now an old man from the Central Guild was saying the highest word the profession has, the one maybe 10 or a dozen living people in the whole world get to wear, and he was saying it about me. The yard went off like a storm. Adventurers I'd never met were roaring, throwing their fists up, pounding each other's backs. Slappy let out a squeal so long it ran out of air twice. Corinne announced loudly, over all of it, that she believed in me more than any of them did, and dared anyone to argue. Walter just stood there with both hands over his mouth and cried openly, the way you cry at a wedding. He got to me before I could sort my face out. He took both my shoulders in his big cracked hands and looked at me the way my own father had never once managed, like a man staring at something he'd had a hand in making. proud clean past the reach of words. He didn't get a single one out. He didn't need to. I'd had a father who gave me a name and then took it back like a loan. I'd just watched a guild clerk stand in the dirt and hand me a bigger one and mean every letter of it. Gordon, grinning, said a man like this needed a proper name, an epithet, the way the great ones all had one. He looked around at the wall and the trees and the tamed monsters, and he offered it up. Lord of the Forest. Leland approved it before I could refuse. It stuck to me that same hour, and it has never come off. I'd told them all I built the base for the rank. That was true. But I'd built it, really, for Marcus, so that being my brother would be a wall he could stand behind instead of a weakness he had to carry. I stood in that roaring yard and thought of him, penned up polite in a palace far away, and I thought, now, let them come to me. They did, faster than I ever expected, and from higher up than I dared aim. The fairies carry things. I've stopped being surprised by what turns up behind my eyes with a bit of someone else's afternoon still stuck to it. A melon-sticky little window opening onto a room I've never stood in. That was how I watched the capital start to turn, secondhand, from 3 days deep in my own forest. The king had the academy's duke on his knees. King Edmund was supposed to be a mediocre ruler, a steady, unremarkable man. He did not look mediocre, hauling a duke over the coals for how an expelled student had become one of the rarest titles in the world. The duke sweated and blamed my old instructor, the one who'd expelled me for sport and had since been quietly demoted to a border wall. The king let him squirm and then reminded him whose signature approved the expulsion. Then the prince spoke, and the room's temperature dropped for me even at that distance. Roland was there, poised, pleased with himself. He praised my talent to the whole court, my talent, as if he'd discovered it, as if the hand he'd ruined had been a favor. He offered grandly to go and recruit me personally, sure to his bones that I'd be honored to serve the man who'd broken me. His father told him no. The king said it plainly, in front of everyone, that I most likely hated the state, and hated Roland above all, because Roland was the one who'd crippled my sword arm and ended my knighthood before it began. He forbade the prince any contact with me at all. Then he explained, slow, like a man explaining a cliff edge to a child, exactly what an S rank is, that we belong to no country, that we can pack up a genius and a fortune's worth of newfound land and walk it across a border to a rival king overnight, and there is nothing a crown can do but weep. He'd rather kneel to me than lose me. He would not let his fourth son's pride cost him that. Roland could not take it in, his mediocre father criticizing him. And then Victor arrived, my eldest brother, the youngest knight commander the realm had ever made, iron all the way through. The king asked him to help build goodwill with me, and Victor said the honest thing, that Marcus would do it far better, being the brother who'd actually loved me. Then he followed the prince out into the corridor, because Roland chased him, still scheming, still wanting a partner for taking me. Victor turned on him with a hand on his sword. He didn't shout. He told Roland, flat and cold, that he was the fourth prince and would never be king, and that if he threw the country into chaos, chasing his ambition, Victor would kill him himself. Then he walked away, and the window in my head showed me Roland standing alone in a gold corridor, while whatever throne he'd been dreaming of quietly went dark behind his eyes. The prince still stood, cornered, forbidden, threatened by his own brother, but standing. That one wasn't finished yet, and I knew it. The other one was. The last window the fairies opened for me that season was the brightest, and I have never enjoyed anything half so much in my life. My father was at a ball. Gerald Ashford, once the head of our house, moved through the chandelier light like a man waiting in warm praise, and the nobles poured it over him. 3 sons, they marveled, a knight commander, a royal guard, and now an S-rank adventurer, one of a dozen in all the world. What a father, what blood must run in that house. He soaked it up, and then, glowing, he told them how he'd always been hard on his third boy for his own good, and how he supposed he'd have to start praising the S-rank now. This man who'd disowned me, who'd taken back the family name like a borrowed coat and put me out the door. He complained comfortably that it was a nuisance, having to be proud of me. Marcus walked into the ballroom. My brother, in a clean royal uniform. Pixie, a bright fleck on his shoulder. Marcus, who 3 years ago had flipped a dinner table into the wall over what this man had done. He crossed the floor while the music thinned and the heads turned, and he held out a scroll with the king's own seal cracked across it. He read it out where everyone could hear. By order of the crown, Gerald Ashford was stripped of his rank, his standing, and his name at court, and sent to the Greymoor frontier, the harshest, coldest edge of the map, to serve out his years as a common soldier, not a lord, not a knight, a soldier in the line, at an age when soft nobles go to Greymoor to die. Gerald laughed at first. He thought it a mistake. He drew himself up and demanded how the king dared. He, the father of a knight commander and a royal guard, and an S rank. And Marcus, quiet, close, cut him off with the only line he'd come to say. "The king is sending you to the frontier," he said, "because you threw away a son worth more than this whole house. And it's the mercy he chose, out of respect for Ethan." The room heard all of it. You could watch it move through the crowd like cold water finding a crack. "He disowned an S rank," someone whispered. "He threw away one of a dozen in the world. How reckless, how stupid." And the same nobles who'd been pouring praise over him a minute before took one small step back, and then another, until my father stood alone in the middle of a shining floor with a decree in his hand, and not one friend left in the light. By the end of that same season, his wife had left him, and the Ashford house had a new master in Victor, and there was not one thing left in the world that still bent a knee to Gerald. He'd spent his life being the father of great men and never once being a father to them. Now the great men had grown up, and every door he'd ever stood proud in front of was shut. The king's own words closed it, carried to me last of all, dry as dust. "This way," he'd said, "we no longer risk angering the S-rank adventurer." That was the whole shape of it, laid out in a single season. My teacher on a border wall, my father in the frontier mud, the guild crowning me, the king forbidding the prince from so much as speaking to me, the crown itself bending my way, because it had finally counted the cost of throwing me out. Every hand that had once shoved me toward the door was turning now, palm up, reaching, every hand but one. Roland still stood in his gold corridor, cornered and desperate, and a cornered man with a prince's pride will always try one last stupid thing. And there was one more shape out past all of it, one I'd only just begun to feel the edges of. A wandering bard had pressed a god's magic into a broken nobody's hand for free and walked off whistling, and I was only now old enough to be afraid of a gift that generous. The kingdom had finished coming to me. The thing that had made me was still on its way. The sky over the Great Wood split open at midday, and an army came out of it. I had been standing at the edge of my own outpost, doing nothing more dangerous than watching Gablina argue with Slappy about the water pressure. Then the light changed. Not clouds. The blue simply peeled back like skin off a fruit, and behind it was a white so clean it hurt, and out of that white came wings. Thousands of them. I stopped counting almost at once. Figures in armor that shone like the inside of a lamp, spears trailing thin fire, wing after wing filling the gap in the sky until the forest below them went pale. Angels. I had heard the word my whole life, the way you hear the word ocean before you have seen one. I had never once thought it would arrive over my log houses on an ordinary afternoon. Corinne moved in front of me before I told her to. Her wine-red eyes tracked the descending host, and she asked quietly why servants of the heavens would come down over a forest full of X-monsters and bread. I did not have an answer. Gablina had gone still with her silver knife half drawn. Slappy pressed cold against my boot and made a small, uncertain sound. Then a voice spoke, and it did not come through the air. It arrived behind my eyes, gentle and enormous, filling the inside of my skull the way water fills a cup. It told me not to be afraid. It told me the bond summoning I carried was no forbidden theft, no crime against the world order. It was pure. It was rational. It was, the voice said with something like fondness, a gift. I turned my head and asked Corinne if she had said something. She hadn't. Nobody near me had spoken. The white folded down out of the sky and became a man. He landed without weight, a body's height above the churned road, radiant, beautiful in a way that had nothing human in it. And I knew the face. I had spent 3 years trying not to think about it. A wandering musician in a roadside tavern, a small harp across his knee, patient eyes that had seemed to already know the ending. The one who had pressed a god's magic into a broken nobody's hand for free and walked off whistling. The bard smiled at me from inside all that light, and I finally understood what had been wrong with the gift the whole time. He told me the whole of it without hurry, the way you explain a chore to a child. The magic had never been a favor. It was a key. He could not walk backward through time himself. No god could, but a mortal wearing his gift could reach into the past and pull forward the things a lost civilization had buried in this very forest, thousands of years deep. That was the only reason the broken second son of a fading house had ever been worth a stranger's kindness. He had needed a hand that could open the door, and any hand would do. So he had chosen the most desperate one he could find, because desperate hands never ask what the gift will cost. I had built a road through a death forest. I had crowned myself a lord out of the wreckage of everything they took, and to the shining thing in front of me, all of that was a lever settling into place. The relics were awake now. The tool had done its work. He said the last part kindly, which was somehow the worst of it. Now that the door stood open, he would take my soul to claim what lay behind it. He said it the way you'd thank a workhorse before selling it. The cold in me went very quiet. I heard Corinne's armor shift, heard Gablina's breath catch, and I lifted one hand a little so they would hold. Then I looked up into all that light and told him no, not pleading. I have never been good at pleading. I told him I was not a stage in his plan. I was not an intermediate anything. 3 years ago, a prince had decided I was nothing, and my own father had signed the same paper, and I had spent every day since making a life out of exactly the parts of me nobody thought were worth keeping. I told the God he could stand in line behind them. He'd get the same answer they did. The light hardened. Whatever passed for patience in him thinned out, and I felt the whole host above me lean forward like a wave about to break. Behind me, the ground tore. Not the sky this time. The earth of my own clearing split along a black seam, and out of it rose a cold that made the god's light look cheap. A tall figure in dark finery unfolded from the dark, cape snapping in a wind that had no source, shoulder chains ringing. I knew this one too. The Demon King, Black Roar. He set himself between me and the heavens, and spoke without turning. And though I only ever caught the shape of his words through my own ears, the meaning landed clean. I, too, am bound to this man. When my contract partner stands in danger, I come. And he told the god, almost courteously, that a heaven willing to devour the boy who woke its treasures was exactly the vile and barbarous thing demons had always known the gods to be. The god called him filth. Black Roar laughed, low and delighted, like a man who had waited a very long time for this exact afternoon. The god stopped talking and simply threw the sky at us. Thousands of angels folded their wings and dropped, spears first, a falling wall of fire and armor aimed at the little cluster of us on the road. There was no fighting that. Even Corinne, who had thrown a golem twice her height, went rigid doing the same arithmetic I was. If all of them landed at once, we would not last a breath. Black Roar asked me to leave it to him. He said the power to do this had come from me, from the strange bottomless magic I had grown without ever understanding how deep it went, and that it was only right he spend it on my behalf. Then he raised one hand toward the falling heavens, and he reached down the bond that ran between us, and he pulled. I have summoned water. I have summoned a blade, a slime, a whole household of the discarded. I once tore a single glass tower up out of nothing over this hill and thought I had touched the ceiling of what the magic could do. This was not that. The forest went, the pines, the road, the log houses, the sky itself, all of it thinned to paper and slid aside, and something ancient and colossal came up through the gap to take their place. A city, an entire lost world city, dragged whole out of a past no living map remembered, unfolding around us floor by floor and street by street until it stood where the great wood had been. Towers of glass and gray stone climbing past anything a mason of this age could dream. A wide dead river, bridges strung like harp strings, a horizon made entirely of buildings. New York, Black Roar named it, as if a name could hold a thing that size. And it was not just walls. The moment its streets closed over us, the light changed. That clean, cruel white the god carried guttered like a candle in a draft. The first angels reached the ground. They came apart, not struck down, not cut, simply undone, the way I had once watched a vampire lose his hold on the moon and crumble to ash and drifting dust. Whatever held them together was divine power, and inside this place, divine power did not work. Rank after rank of them touched those gray streets and dissolved into nothing, silent, bloodless, gone before the next rank landed. The whole falling wall of heaven came down into that city and did not survive the arrival. In the space of a few heartbeats, the sky emptied. Only the god still hung in the air, and even he was dimming. His light stuttered. The thing an ancient people had built this city to do, it did to him now. It drank the holiness straight out of him and gave back nothing. He looked for the first time less like a god and more like a man who had walked into the wrong room. Black Roar rose off the dead street on a demon's black wings, unbothered, at home in a place that unmade angels, and told the god that the final battle he had wanted for 1,000 years could begin whenever he was ready. It was not much of a battle. Stripped of the thing that made him a god, he fought like anyone else with too much pride and not enough left in the tank, and Black Roar took him apart without ever raising his voice. Every holy strike the god threw came out thin and wrong inside the city and did nothing. He grew shrill. He complained. I caught the shape of it through the ringing air, that the bond summoning was his own gift, and that it was cheating. It was filthy to turn his own power back against him. Black Roar answered that his pride had never been in wielding a god's light. His pride was in standing between the people he had chosen and the things that wanted to eat them. If the man beside him had raised him up to swing an ancient world like a club, then swinging it here was the most natural thing in creation. When the god understood he was losing, he turned to me. He offered me a contract, right there, cornered and dimming. He tried to bond me the way I had bonded a slime and a goblin. Sweet-voiced again, generous again. All that patient tavern kindness switched back on like it had never gone out. He would give me terrible relics. Together we would crush the demon. I only had to reach for him. I reached for him, not to take his hand, to test it. I ran the summoning the way I had 10,000 times, felt for the bond, felt for the place where a new tie should catch and hold. Nothing caught. The magic looked at the god and refused him. It came back to me with the flat certainty of a door that has no keyhole. A bond with this one could not be formed. I told him what I had told him before, and I told him it plainly. The only person who had ever made me this angry was the father who threw me away, and I had learned to live without that man too. I would not get along with a god if it killed me. He fled. He gave up all his dignity at once and simply ran for the top of the sky, a streak of failing light, climbing for whatever crack he had come in through. And Corinne, who had stood silent through every word of it with her wine-red eyes never leaving him, lifted one hand. "Understood, master," she said, though I hadn't given an order, and fired. A single red beam left her armor and crossed the whole dead city in a line and caught the god square as he climbed. The Rubido blast. It did not finish him. He was still a god, even a bled-dry one, but it folded him in the air and sent him tumbling up through the gap-trailing pieces of his own light, screaming down at us as he went. Something about justice, something about how the heavens would side with him and grind us all to dust in the end. The usual noise of a proud thing losing. Then the crack in the world closed over him, and he was gone, and the light in the city went ordinary and gray and safe. Blackroar let the city go the way you'd set down something heavy. The gray towers thinned back to paper, the dead river drained into nothing, and my forest came up underneath it all again. The pines, the wall, the water slide. I was still faintly embarrassed by the ordinary blue sky. My people were already running toward me across the road. The whole outpost had watched a god fall out of the heavens and come apart, and none of them seemed sure yet whether to cheer or sit down. I asked Blackroar the only question that mattered. If the magic had truly been the god's, could he simply take it back, try again, another day, another tool? No, he told me, and there was something almost gentle in the grand ruin of his voice. It was wrong to think of the bond summoning as borrowed, or given, or owed. Whatever a wandering musician had pressed into my hand 3 years ago, I had grown into something else entirely. I had raised it, tie by tie, bond by bond, into a thing that was mine and no one else's, and a thing built out of who a person chooses to keep close cannot be reached by the one who handed over the seed. The god had made a key. He had not counted on the key, deciding, on its own, what doors it would open and for whom. Then, my household reached me, and there was no more room for gods. Goblina thumped my arm and said, grinning that crooked grin, that being with the boss beat being a goblin in a hole any day of the week. Slappy climbed my boot and squealed. Tara yawned that it would all work out fine so long as the food stayed good. Vera planted herself in front of me, wolf ears up, and declared that our master was only ever me, and that we would rule this whole stretch of forest together, or not at all. Corinne knelt. She, who bowed at exact careful angles for everyone, went all the way down to one knee in front of me on the churned road, and when she looked up, her voice did not waver. "My master is only you," she said. "My benefactor is only you." I told them all to get up, because I am not built to be knelt to, but I let the moment sit for a breath longer than I needed to. The god had wanted a tool. What he had actually built, without ever meaning to, was this: a goblin and a slime and a cat and a wolf and an ancient girl in a maid's dress, standing on a road none of us were supposed to survive, choosing me on purpose. That was the one thing in all his careful plan he had never been able to summon. Blackroar drew the dark up around himself to leave. Before he stepped back through the black seam, he spread one hand over the whole clearing and gave us a demon's blessing. His protection, he said, on Ethan and everyone Ethan kept. Then the seam folded shut behind him, and the cold went with it, and it was just us again, and the sun, and a forest full of adventurers deciding out loud that the master of this place had beaten a god, and been thanked by the demon king, and was, apparently, something well past ordinary, even for an S rank. I could already hear the rumors building themselves in their mouths. I decided I would deal with those later. The last of it reached me the way the palace always did, through the fairy's shared little soul, a melon-sticky window opening onto a room I have never stood in, a bit of someone else's his afternoon still stuck to the edges of it. The king had summoned the fourth prince. Roland went in expecting, I think, to be praised. He came out of a season in which his father had already forbidden him my name once, and still he walked into that hall certain the throne was drifting toward him on the strength of his own brilliance. His father took that from him in a handful of sentences. He told Roland flatly that he would never be king, not because of the order of his birth. The king said he would sooner rewrite the law, or raise up a daughter, or drag some cousin in off a distant branch of the family tree than set that particular son on the throne. Roland's composure cracked. The window carried it to me plain, the old entitled fury boiling up, the demand to know why every hard thing he had ever done counted for nothing. And the king answered him with the one truth Roland had never once been able to hear, that he weighed every soul alive on a single scale, ability, and threw away whatever the scale called light. That a man like that is blind to resentment, and resentment is the most patient killer in the world. Then the king said my name and used me as the proof, the S rank the kingdom had thrown out a window, who did not respect the prince and never would, and whose grudge Roland had never even felt himself earning. Roland did not learn the lesson. Cornered men with a prince's pride never do. He decided instead that his mediocre father simply could not see genius, and that the way to shut him up was to go and fetch the very man the king had just named, to march into my forest and haul me back and make me the crown's foremost loyal retainer with his own 2 hands, and prove in one stroke that he could bend even the thing that hated him most. The king, watching his son storm out to do it, thought the fairies caught this last and carried it to me quietly, that the boy had no chance in the world of succeeding, but that the errand might finally teach him the one thing no school ever had. The window closed. I sat with it a while. A god had come to collect me and gone home in pieces, and the magic that was supposed to make me a tool had turned out to be the one thing no one, not a father, not a prince, not a heaven, could take back out of my hands. Every debt I had been carrying was paid now, or nearly. The teacher, the house, the father, the crown itself bending my way at last. Every debt but one. Somewhere south of all of it, a cornered prince was saddling a horse to come and drag me back to a throne room, sure right up to the last that the world still ran on the rule he had crushed my hand to prove. He was wrong. He had been wrong for 3 years, and he was, finally, on his way to hear me say it to his face. Far above, past a sky that had closed back into an ordinary blue, something that had promised to return was licking its wounds and remembering my name. But that was a debt for another season. This one was almost closed. I only needed the prince to arrive. The letter came with a royal crest pressed into the wax, and I did not want to touch it. Corinne set it on the table like it might bite. I told her I would rather feed it to something out in the forest than read it. She asked, in that clipped way of hers, whether it was a party invitation, and had already started planning a tuxedo for me and a gown for herself before I got the seal open. It was an invitation of a kind. The Royal Knight Academy wanted me back inside its walls for the annual tournament to show the whole grade what the boy they threw out had become. The crest was not the king's and not the crown prince's. I already knew whose hand had folded this paper. Corinne read over my shoulder, past the part where I had stopped. Then she went very still. The prize for winning the top grade, she said, was marriage to the 3rd princess, Grace. That was when Pixie came through the window like a thrown stone. She was shrieking before she landed. No, absolutely not. I could not marry the princess. It would be the greatest tragedy in the history of tragedies. I asked her to slow down. She could not slow down. Marcus, she said. Marcus and Grace. The 2 of them were in love, really in love, and the tournament would tear them apart and hand the princess off to a stranger like a trophy. I read the last line of the letter twice, a small, generous note at the bottom. If the winner happened to be the same sex as the princess, or already promised to someone else, he could name a replacement to marry in his place. There it was, not an invitation, a leash. Roland could not drag me to the capital, so he had found the one rope that would pull me there on my own 2 feet. My brother's happiness, tied to a sword I would have to pick up. Marcus had found the one warm thing in that whole cold city, and the prince was willing to break it just to reach me. Fine, I would go. I would win, and I would hand the marriage and Grace straight to Marcus. If the prince wanted to keep pulling on that rope, I would come to the capital and take his hands off it. The fairies keep one soul between all of them, so when Pixie rides my brother's shoulder in the capital, a scrap rap of that far-off room sticks to me like syrup on a spoon. I got the next part that way, through a melon-sticky little window opening onto a chamber I have never stood in. Roland had gathered Grace to give her the good news. She would marry the winner of his tournament. He said it the way you would assign a horse to a cart. Grace did not bend the way she once would have. The window showed a girl who had spent years too sick to stand, now on her feet and refusing him to his face. She would not be a prize, she told him, and her life belonged to one person only. Then Marcus walked in. My brother told the prince, plainly, that it was a foolish plan from a man far more foolish than his reputation, and that a man who would treat the woman he loved as a thing to be won was no man at all. And he told Roland the truth the king had already told him, that he would never sit on the throne, because he could not feel the weight of anyone smaller than himself. Grace put her hand into Marcus's. They were already engaged, he said, with the king's own blessing, and if anyone tried to unmake it, the two of them would leave the kingdom together and let the crown explain where its favorite knight had gone. I already know what I'm worth to that man, Marcus said, not to Roland, but to her. And it's you. Somewhere under all his cleverness, the prince heard a door swing shut. He had built a tournament to buy my loyalty. He had just guaranteed I would arrive as an enemy. Good. That was exactly the arrival I had in mind. Corinne folded herself into her flight shell and had us at the academy gates by midday, standing on the one ground I had sworn I would never see again. The students knew me on sight. The whisper moved through them like wind through wheat. That's the 6th year who got expelled. The dregs of House Ashford. Why would he dare come back here? I let them whisper. The principal came out to meet me himself, Halloran. He had a warm handshake ready and a warmer speech about my exploits, my rank, results that did the academy proud. He had heard I made something of myself, and he was prepared to be generous about it. He offered to erase my expulsion. All I had to do was follow a small script, admit the expulsion had been correct, say I had reflected, repented, worked hard, and been graciously allowed back. A tidy little story where the school was never wrong, and I crawled home grateful. I asked him to apologize for throwing me out. He explained patiently that the academy could not admit a mistake, that its reputation would not survive one. What it could do was let me kneel and bow to the statue of its founder, the first principal, and be welcomed into the fold again. Corinne asked very softly for permission to punish him. I told her to wait. I looked at the statue instead, 100 years of carved stone, the founder with his chin lifted, watching generations of boys learn to want his approval. The whole school still measured itself against that raised chin. I lifted my right hand, the one they all remembered as ruined, and pulled the cleaver out of empty air, its long famous edge settling cold into my grip. This is my answer, I said. The blade went through the founder from crown to base in one clean line. The statue stood for a single breath more, and then it came apart, 100 years of stone folding down into rubble across the tournament flagstones. Halloran made a sound I had waited 3 years to hear. The days I spent inside these walls were empty, I told him. I gained nothing here. I only got my life back the day they took the family name away. I would not be coming back, not asked, not ordered, and if he made me say it a second time, I would break more than a statue. Then I stepped over the founder's rubble and went to find the prince. He found me first, a pompous, easy, certain voice, and there he was. Roland, in the dark gold-trimmed uniform of the Golden class, his year's finest arranged around him like furniture. He greeted me like an old friend he had been saving a chair for. I should have leaned on him sooner, he said. He would forgive the statue. He always forgave talent. I reminded him that his last clever plan had cost him my brother, who cut ties with him over a hostage scheme. For all his scheming, I told him, he never once closed the deal. He never read how a person actually felt, so he made enemies he did not need, and that was the crack he kept falling straight into. One of his elites took offense on his behalf, a duke's daughter, long blonde hair, furious that I had not bothered to remember her name, Alyssa. She informed me how rude I was, when the prince would deign to make use of me. The rest joined in, a dropout, an adventurer, grubby work for people with no real talent. Any of them could make S rank in a season if they lowered themselves to try. I drew the cleaver and set its edge under the loudest one's chin before he finished laughing. Insult adventurers all you like, I told him. Just understand that out where I work. Saying it to the wrong face costs you your life. He went quiet. They all did. Not one of them had seen my hand move. Roland only smiled wider. Combat experience, he called it. Exactly why he wanted me at his side. I told him what I wanted instead, to be left alone by him forever. That was when he made his wager. The winner of the tournament would have one wish granted, no refusal allowed. If he won, I became his sword, his vassal, his to command. If I won, he would never trouble me again. Corinne bristled at the very idea of me answering to anyone. Master is master, she said, clipping each word off clean. Why on earth should he take another lord above him? But a wager is a rope with two ends. Win it, and I could cut his claim on me by his own rules, for good. I told him I accepted. Corinne wanted to enter as my summoned monster and end every match before it began. I talked her out of it. If she won my fights, the win belonged to her. This one, I needed to carry with my own two hands, in front of the people who had decided years ago exactly what those hands were worth. They put Roland in the opposite half of the bracket, so we could only ever meet in the final. Of course they did. My first opponent called himself Black Thunder and promised to crush me before I could blink. I reached down the bond to Slappy and flooded the sand under his feet with slippery oil, and Black Thunder went down like a foal on ice. Then I summoned a single combat knife off Gablina's bond, held it up where he could see it, and mentioned that I could make 100 more, and that the next one would actually land. He surrendered. Alyssa shrilled from the stands that this was cheating, slippery muck and thrown blades, an insult to chivalry. I told her adventurers use whatever breaks through, and that knights who could not adapt tended to die in real wars. She had no answer for that. After the first match, I stopped being gentle. The second I answered with a chainsaw, composite summoned, and cut a man's proud sword in half a hand's breadth from his nose. The third, I dropped a steel bear trap out of Terra and Vera's bond and let my opponent walk his own ankle into it. The fourth, I filled the whole arena with Pixie's white flower and touched off a dust explosion that picked the last man up and set him down outside the ring. The quarterfinal barely counted. I reached down the Demon King's bond and pulled a single tower of glass and steel out of nothing, a whole skyscraper standing where the sand had been, and the boy across from me simply sat down in its shadow and conceded. 5 rounds, and I had not asked a soul for help. By the time the semifinal came, the stands had stopped laughing. The semifinal was Alyssa. She came in certain I would cheat again and determined to punish me for it. So I put the summons away and beat her with a sword instead, the cleaver, plain steel work, left-handed, until her guard was gone and the flat of the edge rested against the side of her throat. If this were a real fight, I told her, your head would already be lying in the sand. She dropped her blade. She had lost, and she knew exactly how badly. Then Roland arrived to collect me. He announced to the whole arena that I would be his vassal, and in the same breath, he turned to Alyssa and told her to get out of his sight. A useless failure, no further use to him. All that scrambling to earn a place at his side, and he threw her away between 2 sentences. I found myself standing between them. I asked the prince how arrogant one man had to be, to trample the very people holding him up. Alyssa stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. So did he. He decided the insult was as good as a starting bell. The final had begun. I opened with Slappy's oil across the sand, and he simply was not there. He had watched my first match. He stepped around the slick without once looking down, because he wanted me to know he had studied me. He wanted me to know he had mastered both the orthodox Iron Veil style and the hidden Shadow Veil one, and that he was, by his own accounting, unbeatable. I let him talk, and I let it all come back. The arena 3 years ago, this same sand. A prince who kept swinging long after I was already hurt, until my right hand stopped being a hand at all. Every person in these stands agreeing that made me nothing. I had honestly stopped thinking about him. He was the one who dredged it all back up, so I decided to answer the old debt in full. I reached down the bonds and I called 2 things at once. Onto my right hand, the ruined one, the one this exact sand had watched break. Corinne's gauntlet closed, dark ancient metal sheathing my fingers and my forearm, holding the grip my own tendons could not. And into that restored right hand, I summoned the Stormward Blade, the wave-patterned sword that turns magic aside. 3 years ago, the whole school watched this hand die here. Now the same crowd watched it lift a sword again on the same sand and close its fingers around the hilt. Roland laughed. He found it interesting. He still, even then, wanted me. Thought the restored hand only made me a finer prize. He came at me with everything, both styles at once, and I met him right-handed. That was the part he watched. The orthodox blade in the hand he thought he had killed, trading strokes with him, parrying, holding. He never once watched the other hand. My left brought the cleaver up under his guard, and the duel ended in a single stroke. I will not describe it. I will only tell you what was true afterward. The hands the prince had once used to crush mine were broken past any use, and he would never lift a sword again. The debt I owed him for one ruined hand, I paid back in the only currency that fit. For one breath, something reached him that his whole clever life never had. He looked down at what was left of his hands, and he understood, the way you finally understand a language you refused to learn until it was spoken back to you, that this was his own cruelty, come home wearing the same shape he had given it. He had done this exact thing to a boy on this exact sand and called it fair. Now it was fair. Then I was myself again, and the man was only screaming. He screamed for someone to kill me. I had struck royalty, and that was death. Alyssa cried out that I had lost my mind, that no noble could be forgiven this. I told her I was not a noble. They had thrown that away too. The stands took up the prince's cry and began to come down over the rail, a whole school curdling into a mob. Corinne's maid form split away like a shed coat, and the golem rose up around her, plated and vast, one moving wall between me and all of them. If this was no longer a match, but a mob out to harm her master, she said, she had no reason left to hold her tongue. She would remove every enemy I had to the last one. And then a single voice, old and iron, stopped the whole arena where it stood. The king had come. He walked in with Marcus at his side and a bright-eyed young woman beside them both, and the mob folded back off the rail like a wave pulled home. My brother caught my eye and let out a long breath. He had known I would never bend to any of the prince's tricks, he told me after. But he had also known that if I fought a whole capital to a standstill, the damage to the kingdom would be past all counting. So he had gone and fetched the one man who could end it with a sentence. He had brought the king himself. The king ended it with a sentence. No punishment for me. None at all. The principal came apart at that, protesting, sputtering, begging his majesty to see reason. The king cut him down without raising his voice. I was no longer a knight candidate. I was no longer a noble. I was an S-rank adventurer the kingdom had summoned, surrounded, forced into a fight, and then set its dogs on the instant I won. He named it exactly what it was, a rotten piece of work from start to finish, and he knew every step of it. The king they had all called mediocre had missed nothing. Then he did the thing none of them expected. He turned to me and he apologized for his family, for his son, for everything they had piled onto me one load at a time. And he bowed. A king bowing on the same sand where I had once been made into nothing. He dismissed Halloran from his post between one breath and the next. And he stripped his own son of royal status entirely. No prince anymore. Only the Viscount of Willbrook, a title dead for generations. No inheritance, no standing. A man who would depend on other people's hands for the rest of his life. Roland wailed that he had worked harder than anyone, that he did not deserve this. His father told him that working hard at weighing every soul on a scale and never once feeling the person on it was exactly what had cost him everything. I handed the wager's prize to the only person it had ever really been meant for. I named Marcus in my place. Grace pressed both hands around one of mine. "You gave us back to each other," she said, very softly. Marcus just gripped my shoulder. "I should have protected you sooner. I won't be slow again." For once, a royal decree made two people happy. The king offered me things after that, a posting, a title, a fresh start, relations rebuilt from nothing. I turned all of it down. I told him I was going home, back to the place I had carved out for myself, with the people who had been there long before the crown remembered my name. Then I walked out of the capital for the last time, past the school, past the family that had thrown me away, and now bowed as I went by. For 3 years, they had all agreed on what I was worth. I let their agreement stand there behind me and kept walking. I never once had to crawl back to any of them. In the end, every last one of them had come to me. The rest I heard secondhand, through the fairy window. The academy scrubbed itself down to the stone. Every teacher of the old sort shipped off to sweat in the night order, where laziness does not survive long. The golden class, without its prince and its easy theory, thinned out to almost no one. They call it the phantom class now, and they mean it as a joke. Roland faded quietly into his small dead viscountcy. I found I did not hate him anymore. I even hoped he might learn, down there, the one thing he could never learn on top. Marcus married Grace in a ceremony the whole capital turned out for, took a count's title, and set about building a house that would be his own. My other brother, Victor, I still had not seen. He would manage. He always did. And home was exactly as I had left it, which is to say, already on fire with some new problem before I had set my bags down. A dragon dropped out of the sky onto the clearing, big as a barn and twice as loud, and the whole household went straight to work. Corinne into her armor to shoot and suppress, Slappy up as a wall of water, Goblina low at my side with a grin and a knife, waiting for the opening, Pixie already grinding out flour for a blast, Vera and Tara doing nothing useful at all except making a truly magnificent amount of noise. Then the dragon spoke. It wanted in. It had heard there was ancient power here, and it wanted to share. And could it please have some too? I laughed. Far above, past a sky gone back to ordinary blue, something beaten and patient was still out there somewhere, nursing a promise to come back for me one day, a debt for a much later season. But that was then. This was now. Another loud, ridiculous morning in a home that never once stopped causing me trouble, with the family that chose me in the one place that was finally entirely mine. Let the dragon get in line. There was always room for one more bond.